Chapter 1173. This cultivation country is not bad. I have thousands of incarnations traveling here, the empty lady said. Luo Fan smiled and said, their achievements are indeed beyond my imagination. For this point, there was nothing to be ashamed of, and Luo Fan was not stingy with his praise. His words were heard by the creation god boy, and a proud smile appeared on his face. It was obvious that he was much more relaxed. Although she was not the one who carried out this cultivation country, but the cultivators enlightened by Luo Fan were not her. However, the most fundamental factor was her. Luo Fan's compliment of the well-built cultivation country was a compliment to her, which was enough to make her proud. Luo Fan naturally did not care about the thoughts of the spirit-creating boy. He stood there quietly and chatted with the empty lady about the interesting things that had happened over the past 1,000 years. Although Luo Fan had been comprehending the afterimage left behind by an unknown powerful cultivator in this universe over the past 1,000 years, he had seen countless universes being born and destroyed in the process. The things he had seen and heard were many times more than what Space Maiden had experienced. When he spoke casually, the few words revealed in the language made the boy of creation speechless. He only felt that he was so ignorant in the past that he didn't know that there were so many strange and unpredictable things happening in the world. After all, boy creation god had the temperament of child. With all kinds of wonderful things revealed in the communication between Luo Fan and the air hostess, he had long forgotten about the fact that he was almost grounded by Luo Fan. From time to time, he even dared to interrupt. Fortunately, Luo Fan and the air hostess only treated her as a child. As for its words, they only treated it as a child's babble, but they didn't care. Not long after, rays of light quickly closed in from various parts of the continent. Once they landed, dozens of figures appeared. The leaders were Shun Tun and the Divine God. Among the cultivators behind them, there was Go Li Kun. There were also cultivators like Fireworks. Apart from Shun Tun and Tian Shun, who were already at the Quasi-Saint realm, the others were only at the innate Grand Luo realm. However, even the weakest cultivator would not be weaker than a Khanate Grand Luo. Except for Go Li Kun, who was enlightened by the boy creation, everyone else was enlightened by Luo Fan. As for Luo Fan, although it was a random choice, however, his nature was so brilliant. Even if it was unintentional, the aptitude of the people he valued was definitely not low. Coupled with the fact that they were inherently capable of wielding extremely terrifying power, even the weakest among them could become a Khanate Grand Immortal. The power they could exert had all reached the Sage-to-Be realm. Greetings, exalted immortal. When everyone came before Luo Fan, they were all extremely excited and immediately knelt down to pay their respects. This time, they did not call him by any other names. Instead, they addressed Luo Fan as exalted immortal. In the past, they used to address each other in a messy manner, but that was only because they didn't communicate with each other. They only addressed each other according to their own ideas. But now, they had already formed a nation and their ideas were unified. Why would they still address each other according to their own ideas? Get up. You guys did much better than I imagined. Luo Fan looked at them and smiled faintly. Thank you for your compliment, exalted immortal. Everyone thanked him in unison. After saying that, they slowly stood up and stood at the side. With a casual glance, Luo Fan knew where their current bottlenecks were. He also knew the difficulties they might face in their cultivation, so he didn't waste any time. He did not waste any time and began to talk about the cultivation method. Back then, he did not have high hopes for them, so the cultivation method he gave them was only the most basic. Although it was suitable for them, it could only be considered as an inferior cultivation method in terms of the path of cultivation. Even if they modified it themselves, they would not be able to reach a higher level. No matter how much they modified it, they would not be able to reach a higher level. There were bound to be weaknesses and flaws in the foundation. If such a cultivation method were to continue developing, it might be able to be completely modified after countless years and become another supreme cultivation method that could directly reach the Great Path. However, it was more likely that it would gradually be influenced by the cultivation civilization of the outside world. In the end, it would be abandoned by later generations of cultivators, or would be modified into a method that was closer to a technological civilization. This was clearly not an outcome that Luo Fan wanted to see. This time, Luo Fan did not use his will to transmit the method, but his voice triggered an intense reaction from the universe. Above the void, above this incomparably huge continent, there were all sorts of invisible evil auras constantly gathering. The baleful aura was so strong that it was unimaginable. It constantly shook the huge continent, making Go Lakun, who was maintaining the continent, feel an almost unbearable pressure. She felt like the continent would collapse in the next moment, at any moment. In the face of such a change, Go Lakun was not in the mood to listen to Luo Fan. His face was slightly pale, and his body was trembling slightly. Luo Fan slightly smiled and lifted his foot to lightly step on the ground. An invisible wave instantly swept through the entire continent, which could contain many river systems, and directly triggered the heavy pressure of the continent. In an instant, Go Lakun felt his body relax, and a sense of ease that he had not felt for hundreds of years rose from his heart. When he felt this indescribable sense of ease, the power in his body naturally flowed, and in a trance, he broke through the invisible ordinary. From the innate Zenith Heaven realm, he stepped into the Sage-to-Be realm and became a genuine Sage-to-Be. Such a change directly broke through the originally weak, isolating force of the continent and directly entered the void of the universe, triggering a reaction from the laws of the void of the universe. A tribulation cloud that almost covered the entire continent was formed, and a thunderous roar that could shake the universe was instantly transmitted from a cloud. With such a terrifying movement, how could these cultivators continue to listen to Luo Fan? Their expressions changed drastically as they turned to look at Go Lakun, who was emitting endless rays of light and whose aura had become thousands of times more profound than before. Their eyes were filled with envy and worry. They were also filled with fear. The process of breaking through the innate Zenith Heaven realm and becoming a Sage-to-Be realm Sage-to-Be was not unfamiliar to Shuntun and the Heavenly God. However, the tribulation cloud that they encountered when they broke through was only the size of a solar system. It was even inferior to the tribulation cloud that the Heavenly God encountered back then. Compared to that, the tribulation cloud that Go Lakun encountered when he broke through to the innate Zenith Heaven realm, that was simply the rhythm of the destruction of the world. How could this not cause their expressions to change greatly? Go Lakun used his own power to maintain the entire continent. To the universe, this continent is him, and he is the continent. That's why the tribulation is so heavy, explained Luo Fan with a smile. Please save me, exalted immortal. Go Lakun made a prompt decision and kowtowed to Luo Fan while crying out loudly. Although he was in the midst of a breakthrough, it did not mean that he had completely lost his sense of danger. He did not know how to make the right choice. He knew that the tribulation cloud was coming when it appeared. With his own ability, if he did not have help, he would not be able to withstand the first wave of the tribulation. He would definitely be destroyed in both body and soul. Even if he had the power to destroy the entire universe, he could not change this fact. Today was the first time Go Lakun met Luo Fan. However, in the past hundreds of years, he had heard many rumors about Luo Fan from his fellow cultivators. He knew that Luo Fan's power had reached an unimaginable level. Today was the first time they met. It made him feel the vastness and profoundness of the path of cultivation like never before. He even realized that other people's descriptions of the exalted immortal before him were too low. They could not even describe 1/10,000th of the terror of this exalted immortal. Under such circumstances, seeing that he was in danger that he could not resist, he naturally asked Luo Fan for help at the first moment. Such a straightforward request for help made the others come to a sudden realization, but made Luo Fan shake his head and laugh. If a cultivator grew up normally in the cultivation world, such a choice would not be made so easily. For a cultivator, challenging an irresistible tribulation was both a danger and an opportunity. No matter how great the tribulation was, a normal cultivator would not admit defeat and asked for help without putting up a real fight. However, when he thought about how Golakun had only become a cultivator for a few hundred years, and how many tens of thousands or even hundreds of millions of years, he was the most advanced technological creation of a superpower. This kind of mentality was understandable. He smiled and pointed at Golakun. In an instant, Golakun felt his body become light, and he could no longer feel the existence of the continent that was supported by his power. With this change, the tribulation clouds in the sky, which were big enough to cover the entire continent, gradually dissipated. Soon, only a huge galaxy was left, quietly floating above Golakun's head. Compared to the tribulation clouds of ordinary cultivators, such a size was still unimaginably big. But compared to the tribulation clouds that covered the entire continent, which were the size of countless galaxies, it was so small that it was almost negligible. Previously, Golakun would not be able to withstand the first wave of attacks from the tribulation clouds. It was a terrifying tribulation that would definitely kill him immediately. But now, the situation of the tribulation was completely different. For him, the current tribulation happened to be stuck at his limit. It made him feel that as long as he fully unleashed his potential, he would definitely be able to get through it. Seeing such a change in the predestined fate, Golakun also understood Luo Fan's intentions. He hurriedly thanked Luo Fan, and with a slight sway of his body, he turned into a dazzling light and rushed up. In the blink of an eye, he passed through this continent and went outside. When this continent was built, his power was the main body, and it was supported by his power for hundreds of years. Therefore, he was very familiar with this continent, and there were all kinds of special powers on this continent. The ability to leave the continent in an instant was one of them. Previously, he flew over slowly with the heavenly god and the others only because he had not seen Luo Fan, so he did not dare to come over first. As he left the continent, the tribulation clouds that were the size of a galaxy also left the continent, still floating above his head. Next, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Countless terrifying attacks descended from the tribulation clouds, drowning Golakun. There was nothing much to say about the process of transcending tribulation. With Golakun's current strength, he could even threaten a peak sage-to-be or a Tao master. Although this tribulation was terrifying, if he performed well, it wouldn't be difficult for him to overcome it. A few days later, Golakun landed happily in front of Luo Fan. "Thank you, exalted immortal, for saving my life." Golakun kowtowed to Luo Fan once again. Said, "Don't stand on ceremony." Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "This is also because you have accumulated enough strength to survive the tribulation. What I did was to cut off the misunderstanding the universe has about you." What Luo Fan did just now was indeed not much. The tribulation caused by Golakun was so terrifying. The reason was none other than the fact that the universe treated this continent as its body, and Golakun's breakthrough was the same as the continent's breakthrough. With the size of this continent and the power of this continent, for it to be able to trigger such a terrifying tribulation. Obviously, it was natural. What Luo Fan did just now was to completely cut off the connection between Golakun and this continent. This continent was the continent, and Golakun was Golakun. There was no longer any connection between the two. With such a connection severed, the universe naturally wouldn't treat this continent as Golakun anymore, and the majority of the tribulation cloud naturally dispersed. All of this, of course, Luo Fan didn't explain it too clearly to them. After dismissing Golakun, he continued to talk. At the beginning, he talked about the problems that every cultivator had encountered during their cultivation, the detours they had taken in the process of cultivation, and the various hidden dangers they had now. These were the things that the divine god and the others hoped for the most. They listened attentively, and their faces were full of enlightenment, regret, and relief. Fortunately, I met the exalted immortal. Otherwise, if these hidden dangers of mine were to erupt in the future, I'm afraid I would die without a burial place. Such a thought emerged in the divine god's mind. However, as soon as this thought emerged, he extinguished it. It wasn't that he didn't dare to think about this. It was just that this wasn't the time to think about this. Although the content of Luo Fan's talk was not aimed at himself, the content that was aimed at the others was extremely important to him. From each sentence, he could feel the supreme mystery of the absolute truth. It would be a great loss if he didn't listen to it. So how could he waste time on his own gains? As Luo Fan continued to talk, the ominous aura in the sky became denser and stronger. Although it hadn't reached the point where it had condensed into a tribulation cloud, it had an even more terrifying aura of annihilation. It gave people a vague feeling that if it pounced down, countless living beings on this huge continent would be instantly destroyed. After several days of talking about the hidden dangers of the cultivators, Luo Fan no longer talked about cultivation methods. Instead, he started talking about the mystery of the Great Path. This great Tao was so mysterious that it wasn't a language at all. Instead, it was the sound of the great Tao. As soon as it left his mouth, it shook the void and caused the baleful qi in the sky to descend with a loud rumble. It completely enveloped the area that Luo Fan was in, covering hundreds of millions of miles in radius. This ominous aura was naturally stimulated by the universe, and it wasn't something that could be compared to the ominous aura produced by the slaughter of living beings. After enveloping a radius of hundreds of millions of kilometers, it directly corroded everything within it. Even time, space, and even the laws of laws on a deeper level began to collapse under the corrosion. For the land on this continent, this kind of corrosion was naturally unstoppable and terrifying. Almost in the blink of an eye, the void within a radius of hundreds of millions of kilometers was completely corroded. Only the mountain that Luo Fan and the other cultivators were on was left floating in the endless, ominous aura. It felt like it was floating above a boundless abyss. Normally, this kind of change would naturally cause the heavenly gods and the others to be shocked, and they wouldn't be immersed in the Great Path lecture. However, at this moment, all of them were immersed in the Great Path melody that Luo Fan spoke. Everything that happened in the outside world, including the change in time, was already happening in another world to them. Although they could see it and hear it, they couldn't feel it at all. It couldn't cause any change in their emotions at all. The baleful aura was mainly targeted at this mountain peak, as well as Luo Fan and the others on it. The ominous aura surrounding this mountain was naturally the densest and most powerful. However, no matter how powerful the ominous aura was, no matter how terrifying its impact was, it couldn't even get half a step closer to this mountain. Every time they approached the mountain, they would encounter the sounds of the great Tao coming from Luo Fan's mouth. Naturally, they would be disintegrated and pushed away by these sounds. The ominous aura itself was faintly mixed with the images of countless technological creations. It seemed to have enough power to destroy the world, and even time, space, matter, energy, and even laws would completely collapse under its corrosion. However, in the face of the invisible Great Path melody, the images of countless technological creations that were mixed with the ominous aura completely collapsed upon contact. Not only did they collapse into ominous aura, but they also directly collapsed into nothingness. The heavenly gods and the other cultivators couldn't see or hear this mysterious change at all, but the Space Maiden and the Divine Creation Boy could see and hear everything clearly. For a moment, both of them were extremely shocked. Chapter 1174. The voice of the Grand Tao itself didn't have any substantial power. If one were to use it against an enemy, one could only hope that the enemy's mind would fall into a daze after hearing the voice of the Grand Tao, giving the enemy an opportunity to take advantage of. It was naturally impossible to make the great Tao voice unleash its substantial power and destroy the world. However, the sound of the great Tao was the most effective method to deal with the boundless baleful aura that was triggered by Luo Fan's desire. The essence of the baleful aura was actually in existence with the nature of the sound of the great Tao. However, compared to the sound of the great Tao, it was emitted by the universe, so its might could naturally cause the universe itself to change. This was also the reason why the baleful aura was able to corrode the land on this continent. It was also the reason why time, space, matter, energy, and even the laws of nature were all corroded. Compared to the infernal chi, the sound of the great Tao seemed to have become a real entity, becoming an existence with substantial power. It completely annihilated the infernal chi that dared to invade the interior of the mountain, which was to approach Luo Fan's body within a certain range, and turned it into nothingness. This process of preaching the Tao lasted for 3 whole months. During these 3 months, the mountain that Luo Fan had randomly chosen seemed to have been completely separated from the continent. The land within a radius of hundreds of millions of kilometers was completely filled with black, killing intent, and it was completely isolated from the continent. It was completely isolated from the cultivation nation. Fortunately, the continent was just too vast, and the cultivation country itself had only been established for a few hundred years. As a result, there were not so many people on the continent that every region of the continent was filled with people. As a result, there were no signs of human habitation within a radius of hundreds of millions of kilometers around the mountain. Although many living beings had died because of the killing intent, there were no intelligent creatures, or rather, not a single citizen of the cultivation nation had died because of it. It was precisely because the continent was just too vast that the citizens of the nation had too many things to pay attention to. The changes at the border were too distant for them. So the changes in this location over the past 3 months did not attract the attention of the cultivation nation. It was precisely because the continent was just too vast that the citizens of the nation had too many things to pay attention to. In fact, none of them were surprised that the cultivation nation's highest echelon had disappeared. After all, to a cultivator, 3 months was like a nap. What was the big deal about the disappearance of the highest officials of the country for 3 months? 3 months later, Luo Fan stopped chanting the great Tao voice. Looking at the heavenly gods and the others who were completely engrossed in the game, Shao Chen smiled. With their attainments in cultivation, it was impossible for them to do so. Even though the things he talked about weren't very deep or profound grand Tao profundities, it was enough for them to comprehend. According to his calculations, it would take at least 3 years for them to wake up. As for those with the best aptitude, they would be the slowest to wake up. It might take them 30 years to wake up from the lingering sounds of the great Tao. He turned to look at the boy creation god next to him. Although he was not immersed in it, he looked at him with reverence. That expression, his demeanor was no longer as casual as it had been at the beginning. That expression gave Luo Fan the feeling that he was looking at a supreme saint. Facing such a change, although Luo Fan was a little confused, he was too lazy to care. Why do you have the same expression? Luo Fan turned to look at the air hostess. He couldn't help but feel helpless. It turned out that although the air hostess hit it well, her expression was a little closer to the boy creation god. The process of your preaching just now was too shocking. I couldn't help but be affected. The air hostess calmed herself down and said, That's nothing. You can do it in the future. What I have said is not of much use to you. You don't have to remember it. Luo Fan smiled. Although the mysteries of the Great Tao were directly extracted by Luo Fan from the Great Tao, they were extremely basic mysteries. For cultivators at the level of heavenly gods, it was naturally of great benefit. However, such a great Tao voice was of little value to the air hostess. If she was inspired by it, it would naturally be a good thing. However, if she were to seriously memorize it, it would be somewhat unnecessary for her to comprehend it. After all, the most important thing for the air hostess now was to sort out her own worldview. She needed to use her own worldview to explain the world, explain the heaven and earth, and even explain the chaotic state. To her, no matter how profound the mysteries of the Great Tao were, they were all Luo Fan's own understanding. They were influenced by his worldview. If she were to mechanically apply it, it would instead become an obstacle for her to sort out her own worldview. In terms of cultivation, the air hostess naturally listened to Luo Fan. Since Luo Fan said that there was no need to memorize it, The air hostess also drove away the many great Tao voices that she had left in her heart. Her expression returned to normal. They still have to stay here for many years. If the surrounding inauspicious chi isn't cleared, I'm afraid there will be some trouble. The air hostess looked at the surrounding inauspicious chi and said with a frown. These cultivators were enlightened by Luo Fan. Naturally, her feelings for them were extremely different from others. She invested a lot of care in them. Hearing the air hostess reminder, Luo Fan smiled and said, the inauspicious chi will disperse very soon. But you're right. Before it disperses, the inauspicious chi might still harm them. However, we can't ignore it. With that, he raised his hand and waved gently. In an instant, the endless inauspicious chi that filled a radius of hundreds of millions of kilometers began to rapidly gather in his palm. The speed at which it gathered was unimaginably fast. In an instant, it formed a huge vortex next to his hand. This whirlpool covered the entire area where the killing intent pervaded, but isolated the location of the kami and the others. Although they were in the middle of the whirlpool, they were not contaminated by the killing intent, and they were not injured at all by the killing intent. With such a shocking gathering speed, the inauspicious chi had condensed into a fist-sized black crystal on Luo Fan's palm in just a few dozen breaths. The black crystal was crystal clear. Smoke and clouds churned within it, as if it was displaying various battles between cultivation and technology. There were even faint sounds of explosions and clashes. After the inauspicious chi completely disappeared, the continent's appearance, after being corroded by the inauspicious chi, was revealed once again. An empty space that spanned hundreds of millions of kilometers had appeared on the continent. There was nothing inside the hole. Even time, space, and laws were still in a state of chaos. At this moment, they were only slowly recovering. At the center of the huge, empty space, the mountain that Luo Fan and the others were on was floating alone. It looked like the only pure land in the abyss, the only light. It's just a little bit of inauspicious chi, and the continent has become like this. How can a cultivation country last if it's based on this? Luo Fan sighed when he saw this. Through the terrifying state of the empty space, Luo Fan was able to see the essence of the continent even more clearly. It was a loose structure. Their independent states were worlds apart from the continents that had formed naturally. It could be said that a slightly stronger impact would probably be able to smash the continent full of holes. The reason why it had not been riddled with holes before was probably because it had the support of a cultivator like Golikun, who could destroy the entire universe. It was obvious that placing all of its safety on Golikun would not be able to last for long. One day, Golikun might have an accident, a problem with his tribulation, or a fever that made him lose control of his mentality. Wouldn't the entire cultivation country be destroyed in a day? Luo Fan, who had a lot of expectations for the cultivation country, would naturally not sit back and watch such things continue. He raised his hand and waved gently. A mysterious wave instantly covered the entire continent, which was a vast area that could accommodate many river systems. The wave was extremely mysterious. After it covered the entire continent, it began to shake in an extremely mysterious and exquisite manner. The tremors spread across the entire continent. They went deep into every inch of the continent, causing the entire continent to shake along with the tremors. However, such a change completely cut off the senses of all living beings on the continent. To those living beings, the continent did not seem any different from before. It was still the same continent. It was still as natural and as wonderful as ever. As the tremors spread, countless tiny impurities scattered from the continent and gradually spread out in the void of the universe. They gradually disappeared into the universe. These impurities were a part of the continent itself. They were only removed because they did not meet Luo Fan's requirements. If they were used to condense planets and create technological fortresses, it would even be a good choice to use them to refine magic tools and treasures. Perhaps they would be able to condense into various special forms under the effect of a certain power in the future. However, at this moment, they were relentlessly removed by Luo Fan. As the impurities were removed, the continent gradually shrunk. Although its vastness did not change, its thickness decreased at a speed visible to the naked eye. It turned out that this huge continent was thousands of light years deep. If it was not so deep, the continent itself would look like a piece of paper, and its fragility would be unacceptable. However, after Luo Fan removed the impurities, the thickness had shrunk to only 100 light years in just a few days. It had shrunk by more than 10 times. However, although the thickness had shrunk, the originally loose feeling that the continent gave people began to gradually fade. A sharp and condensed feeling was gradually emitted from the continent. After Luo Fan removed all the impurities, the sharp and condensed feeling was so strong that one would think that the continent was carved out of a huge rock. At this time, the thickness of the land on this continent had shrunk to a mere 80 light years. Based on the surface area of the continent that could accommodate many river systems, the continent looked like a thin piece of gauze paper. At this point, Luo Fan was somewhat satisfied. The vibration of the waves changed slightly. From the original removal of impurities from the continent, it changed to pulling all kinds of special free energy from the void of the universe and guiding the endless starlight into the continent. This guiding method was extremely shocking and terrifying. In a trance, a huge whirlpool appeared around the entire continent. This whirlpool was so vast that the continent that could accommodate many river systems was only equivalent to the eye of the whirlpool. The vastness of the whirlpool could be imagined from this. Endless energy flowed into the continent through the whirlpool, filling every inch of the continent and fusing into every bit of matter. The amount of energy was too great, so great that it condensed into a substance on the continent. It was so great that the land and the matter naturally began to grow and split. As a result, the thickness of the continent began to increase and thicken. 80 light years, 90 light years, 100 light years, 200 light years, 300 light years. After all, this process was a process of condensing energy. Even if the speed of condensing was unimaginably fast, given the size of the continent, no matter how fast it would still take a lot of time. Therefore, under such circumstances, in such a situation, it took more than 3 months, close to 100 days, for the continent to grow to a thickness of 10,000 light years. It permeated the star region where the continent was located. Anyone who stepped into the star region and saw the continent would feel that the continent was eternally unmoving and that no power could break it. At this point, a sense of toughness and stability permeated the star region where the continent was located. Anyone who stepped into the star region and saw the continent would feel that the continent was eternally unmoving and that no power could break it. At this point in time, Luo Fan knew that the continent no longer needed Go Lakun's power to support it in terms of stability. The continent itself was already a complete entity. Even Go Lakun would not be able to truly destroy the continent unless he unleashed an attack that could destroy the entire universe. At this point, clearly, the transformation of this continent, the cultivation country, could be said to be halfway done. Any country could only exist stably and for a long time if it had a land that could exist for a long time. However, it was clear that this was only a part of it. The country had to at least exhale the old and absorb the new, forming a virtuous cycle with the outside world. Only then could it be powerful for a long time without gradually decaying over time. The fact that this continent could exist for a long time meant that the cultivation country already had the foundation to continue existing for a long time. But if that was all there was to it, the cultivation nation would eventually decay. It would be affected by the cultivation civilization and eventually no longer be what it was. Luo Fan looked up at the sky. For the other living beings on this continent, there was only one sun in the sky and the others were just stars. But for Luo Fan, the number of suns in the sky was beyond imagination. The densely packed stars that revolved around the entire continent seemed intricate, but in fact, they did not contain many mysteries. They were only able to provide light and heat to the continent because of the restraint of a powerful force. If this force was lost, these stars would either fall onto the continent or fly away from the continent, according to the way they revolved. Clearly, this would hinder the continent's cycle of exhaling the old and absorbing the new. The stars provided light and heat to the continent, which meant that they were providing the continent with new power. It was considered a part of the cycle of exhaling the old and absorbing the new. But because such a supply would only appear under the restraint of a powerful force, it naturally could not be considered a healthy and long-lasting cycle. I've still been bound by the thinking of a technological civilization. Luo Fan looked at the way the stars revolved and could not help but sigh again. He raised his hand and turned it, and the ripple that covered the entire continent instantly changed direction. It directly formed an invisible ring-shaped barrier around the continent. The ring-shaped barrier enveloped the entire continent from all directions, making it seem as if the continent was lying in an extremely flat eggshell, and the stars happened to be absorbed into the surface of the ring-shaped barrier, like specks of light dotted over an extremely flat eggshell. With that done, Luo Fan raised his hand and pressed down on the translucent black crystal formed from killing intent. The black crystal instantly disappeared before him, directly traversing a distance of over 10,000 light years and appearing on the side of the ring-shaped barrier that was below the continent. It exploded and fused with a layer of ripples, and began to flow in an extremely mysterious manner beneath the ring-shaped barrier. As it circulated, a formless, baleful aura from the void of the universe was drawn over and continuously integrated into the baleful aura, causing the amount of baleful aura to increase, become denser and darker, and gradually replace the ripples that formed the ring-shaped barrier. At the same time that the killing intent appeared, some auspicious gang chi that was completely opposite of the killing intent appeared out of thin air above the continent. Like the killing intent, it began to spread continuously, gradually replacing the ripples that formed the ring-shaped barrier above. The killing intent and gang chi were two completely opposite existences in the universe. When the two fused, they completely neutralized each other and turned into nothingness. The killing intent that was produced below was not produced because Luo Fan had done something that he could not tolerate day and night. Instead, it was produced because of the pulling of the killing intent. For every strand of killing intent that was produced, the same amount of gang chi would be produced. Chapter 1175. The speed at which this process continued was extremely shocking. The entire continent could contain many river systems, which meant that it was tens of thousands of light years in size. It was easy to imagine just how enormous the light barrier that could completely envelop the entire continent was. However, just like that, as the baleful aura permeated the bottom of the continent and the stellar chi completely filled the top of the continent, less than 3 months had passed. After 3 months, the ellipsoidal barrier of the continent had completely turned into the mysterious stellar chi and baleful aura. The mysterious undulations that were originally supported by Luo Fan's power had disappeared without a trace, as if they had never appeared. The stellar chi and baleful aura were existences that did not originally exist in this universe. They were existences with completely different natures. The huge barrier that the two of them formed began to circulate according to some mysterious law. The stellar chi and baleful aura intertwined with each other, canceling each other out, but also promoting each other. Gradually, they form an extremely stable cycle, causing the huge barrier to become more and more stable and tighter. This caused the space inside and outside the barrier to gradually show subtle differences. The stellar chi and baleful aura canceled each other out, but they also promoted each other. This process naturally involved the death and birth of endless power. This caused this continent, which was also a cultivation country, to breathe in the old and breathe in the new in an extremely wondrous way. This allowed the power it possessed to not increase or decrease due to the isolation between the inside and the outside. Instead, it formed an extremely subtle relationship with the entire universe. This allowed this continent to become more and more powerful as time passed. Under the effects of the stellar chi and baleful aura, the many stars that were like spots of light that adorned the barrier also began to operate in a different way. Vaguely, it contained the mysteries contained in the circulation of the stellar chi and baleful aura. Because this continent was unimaginably vast, any star in one region would be the sun of that region, but in another region, that star would become a star. The sunrise and sunset of the entire continent was no longer the same as an ordinary planet. It was no longer the same as the world where the sky was round and the earth was square. It was the east rising and the west setting. Instead, it was the evolution of the sun and the stars. In other words, in any region of the continent, at dawn, a small star would gradually grow in size from the east. When the sun completely rose, the star would become a sun and start to move from east to west. During this process, the sun grew bigger and brighter. At noon, it reached its peak. After noon, as if the process in the morning was reversed, the sun became smaller and smaller. It grew dimmer and dimmer. In the evening, it would finally turn into a star, and the sky of this region would naturally become a clear and bright starry sky. Such a process. Of course, it was impossible to make all the suns on the continent synchronize with each other. But just as ordinary planets had different time zones and sunrise and sunset times, this continent also had different time zones and sunrise and sunset times. However, compared to a normal planet that only had a sequence of changes, this continent's changes were much more complicated and mysterious. All kinds of special natural landscapes, such as 2 suns appearing at the same time, 9 suns rising at the same time, and so on, were extremely common. It could be imagined that from now on, the study of the changes of time zones and the laws of the changes of the stars and the sun would become an extremely broad and vast subject in this cultivation country. It would be enough to support a large number of cultivators. As his thoughts swept across the entire country, Luo Fan instantly saw the current situation of the entire country clearly. He knew the state of this continent after his transformation, and he could not help but show a faint smile on his face. In his opinion, this continent was not perfect. It could not even unify the sunrise and sunset, and it did not even have a moon, but it could already exist independently. There was no need for any power to maintain the existence of this continent, and there was no need for Go Lakun to support this continent at all times. Compared to its original appearance, it was already tens of thousands of times stronger. Under such circumstances, even if the sunrise and sunset were not unified, and even if there was no moon, it would only be a white wall with a slight flaw. It was to the extent where if one looked at it from another perspective, this could also be considered a special characteristic of this continent, a cultivation country. Regarding this as a merit was also understandable. In any case, this was not Luo Fan's own world. He had only done this to give the cultivation country a foundation. It was enough for him to do this. It's finally done. He nodded in satisfaction and smiled at the Space Maiden. Although he had transformed the entire continent and even created a protective barrier of great evil for it, Luo Fan did not change the mountain they were currently on. The mountain continued to float in the pitch-black void. Above, below, left, and right there was nothing in all directions. Only when one was hundreds of millions of kilometers away would one be able to see land. If someone's eyesight and perception were stronger, they would be able to see or sense the scene tens of thousands of light years below the mountain peak. Then they would definitely be able to see that there was a layer of evil aura below the mountain peak that did not have much destructive power, but was capable of destroying everything in this universe. Master, how can these Gang Chi and Evil Chi run for a long time? They restrain each other. Once they come into contact with each other, they will neutralize and disappear. Won't this balance be broken one day, causing them to be completely annihilated and neutralized? Such a structure is too fragile, isn't it? Before the Space Maiden could speak, the spirit-creating boy, who had seen the whole transformation process, began to shout. Luo Fan sighed and raised his hand helplessly to hit the head of the spirit-creating boy. He said, "Is this what a magic treasure at the town master level should say? Even a slightly smarter practitioner will know the mystery behind it. Why can't you see it clearly?" As he spoke, he felt that his hand felt quite good. He hit the head a few more times. This made the spirit-creating boy feel aggrieved. He said, "I have always been cultivating by myself, and I don't need to comprehend the Tao. I just need to constantly refine my body. Master, you haven't taught me anything since I came out. How could I know?" Her voice was aggrieved, soft and weak. People who didn't know would think that Luo Fan bullied her. Seeing this, the Space Maiden could not help but overflow with motherly love. She pulled the spirit-creating boy over and began to comfort him. At the same time, she could not help but roll her eyes at Luo Fan. Such an expression appeared on her face, which seemed to be eternally motionless. It was a rare sight which made Luo Fan's heart slightly touched. "Do you still need to teach these? You're already a magic treasure at the town master level. All kinds of mysteries at the town master level have long been engraved in your instinct. As long as you know a little about your body, how can you not know these? Moreover, even if you didn't try to understand it, you've been listening to me for such a long time. How could you not understand such a superficial question?" The more Luo Fan said, the more he felt angry at Luo Fan for not striving for success. He could not help but want to pat her head again. The Space Maiden hurriedly protected the spirit-creating boy. "Why do you lower yourself to the level of a child?" Although the voice was still as calm as usual, Luo Fan heard a trace of reproach in it. "Madam is still the best." The spirit-creating boy got a backer and was overjoyed. He hugged the Space Maiden for a while, and a proud smile appeared on his face. Seeing this, how could Luo Fan say anything else? He could only sigh. He explained, "There's a most important prerequisite for a cycle system to be completely neutralized and annihilated. That is, the system must be absolutely balanced. The quantity of the two existences must be completely equal. How can the cycle system of Gang Qi and Evil Qi that I have developed now meet this characteristic? Although the stellar energy was born from the baleful aura, before the stellar energy was born, I had already put in the naturally formed baleful aura of the universe into it. This way, no matter how much stellar energy was born, the final result would be that the baleful aura would be more than the stellar energy I put in at the beginning." These words made the spirit-creating boy show a thoughtful look, but there was still a perplexed expression in his eyes. Luo Fan saw that she still didn't understand. Although he was somewhat helpless, he still continued to explain. "In this case, even if all the aura and infernal energy were completely annihilated, the little bit of infernal energy that I had put in at the beginning would still be drawn over, and it would still produce aura and attach itself to this layer of aura. How could it possibly fall into the situation of completely disappearing and collapsing?" "Ah, I see. So, the evil Qi that Master put in the Gang Qi layer at the beginning is equivalent to a little primer." The spirit-creating boy's eyes lit up and said, "That's right." Luo Fan sighed helplessly. For him, explaining such a simple problem was simply torturing him. If it wasn't for the Air Maiden, he would not have bothered to explain like this. The Air Maiden looked at the spirit-creating boy who had become happy again and couldn't help but show a faint smile. For Luo Fan, refining the creation shrine was just something he did casually. After refining it, he did not spend too much time with her, nor did he use her to do many things. Therefore, it could be said that the relationship between him and the spirit-creating boy was not too close. But for the Air Maiden, it was different. For her, this magic treasure was given to her by Luo Fan, and it had so many wonderful uses, so she naturally cared a lot about it. In the past 1,000 years, she had used this magic treasure many times. Usually, she often communicated with the spirit-creating boy. Under such circumstances, the relationship between her and the spirit-creating boy was naturally very close. In addition, the spirit-creating boy had the temperament of a child, and the way he spoke and did things usually had a hint of childishness, which could excite a woman's maternal instincts. Therefore, unknowingly, the air maiden invested the maternal instincts that she had almost never shown in her. That was why she behaved like she did now. How about we have a child? Luo Fan looked at the air maiden and couldn't help but say on a whim. This caused the air maiden to suddenly be stunned. Then, her face turned red, and after a while, she returned to her normal calm self. She said, "Although I really want to, let's forget about it. If we want to have a child now, who knows how long it will take to gestate? Now, in a few billion years, the world is going to collapse. When that time comes, we don't even know if we can survive. If we give birth to a child, the future is uncertain, and we can't guarantee that he will become a talent. How can we bear that? If that's the case, you don't have to worry. I have a way to let the two of you survive." Luo Fan listened and smiled. "Forget it." The air maiden shook her head and said, "Forget it. If we can survive the great tribulation of heaven and earth, we will naturally have eternal time. We will have enough time to have children. If we have children now, I'm afraid it will take away our energy, and the chances of us surviving the tribulation will be smaller. This is not good for anyone." Hearing the air maiden's words, Luo Fan smiled and did not insist. He suggested having children because he saw the rare motherly instinct in the air maiden. He actually didn't care whether he had children or not. At least in the primordial world, he even had grandchildren, although they were not his biological children when the world was first born. In this way, he was not much different from his biological children. Therefore, he was not curious about having children. Naturally, he was not in a hurry. Moreover, the most important thing was that what the air maiden said was extremely reasonable. If they could survive the great tribulation of heaven and earth, they would naturally have eternal time to have children. If they could not, they would die and their souls would scatter. If they wanted children, they would only suffer. Although the air maiden rejected Luo Fan's suggestion, she was obviously very reluctant. Her expression was still calm. However, both Luo Fan and the God-creating boy could feel that she was depressed. The God-creating boy saw this. He hurriedly said a lot of childish words. After a while, he finally recovered the air maiden's mood. When the air maiden recovered, Luo Fan asked, "How's your journey going?" "It's going quite well. However, it's still not enough to sort out the accumulation of my own worldview," the air maiden said. "Don't worry. It took me millions or even tens of millions of years to sort out my worldview. You've only started for 1,000 years. Even if your comprehension is 100 times better than mine, it's impossible for you to be so fast," Luo Fan said with a smile. When the air maiden heard Luo Fan's words, she could not help but roll her eyes. "My comprehension is 100 times better than yours? You're really guilty." At this moment, she was much livelier than before. Her expression was no longer as calm and indifferent as before. Instead, there were many more vivid changes. Apart from the slight changes in her temperament due to her incarnation traveling in this technological universe over the years, the most fundamental reason was that Luo Fan had suggested to her whether they should have a child or not. Whether it was a man or a woman, their feelings towards a woman or a man who was willing to have a child with them would be different compared to others. Although the air maiden was a cultivator, she was also a woman. Naturally, she was no exception. At this moment, the feeling she had when she looked at Luo Fan was a little different from before. If Luo Fan was said to be her Tao companion, a man whom she was willing to accompany for eternity, then at this moment, Luo Fan had already become half of herself. No living being could love others more than themselves. Even the men and women who sacrificed themselves for their other half in the secular world were not actually doing it for their other half. They were only doing it for the feelings and obsessions in their hearts. At the end of the day, it was still for themselves. A cultivator's temperament was perfect. At the Khanate Zenith Heaven realm, it was even more self-contained and did not seek external help. Under such circumstances, this kind of mentality would only become stronger and not lesser. This was also the fundamental reason why the higher the cultivation realm, the fewer the situation of becoming Tao companions. At this moment, the air maiden regarded Luo Fan as half of herself. Naturally, they were much closer than before. Because of this mentality, the Air Maiden had less control over her mind in front of Luo Fan. Naturally, her expression was much richer and more vivid. Naturally, Luo Fan noticed this change. He could not help but smile. Although I've comprehended the wonders of the worldview faster than you, it's only because I have more knowledge than you. It doesn't mean that my comprehension is really strong. Keep on fooling me. I'm not one of those little girls. The Air Maiden rolled her eyes and said, "Huh." Luo Fan laughed and did not argue further. Before a cultivator cultivated the immortal Tao, talent was the most important. This was because before cultivating the immortal Tao, all living beings and cultivators were limited by their lifespans. The only difference was the length of their lifespans due to their different races. Due to the limitation of one's lifespan, talent and comprehension would determine whether a cultivator could break through their limits and achieve the immortal Tao before their lifespans ended. From then on, they would no longer be limited by their lifespans. However, once they achieved the immortal Tao, talent would no longer be a factor that shackled a cultivator. That was because once one achieved the immortal Tao, one would gain eternal life and endless time. As long as one had enough comprehension ability, no matter how bad one's talent was, under the accumulation of endless time, one would still be able to improve and reach unimaginable heights. Therefore, after achieving the immortal Tao, comprehension was the most important thing to a cultivator. However, this did not mean that comprehension was always that important to a cultivator. Before breaking through the primordial grand Luo realm and achieving the Sage-to-Be realm, every step was an exploration in the endless fog of the great Tao. Every step forward required one to choose the right path among countless wrong paths. Without sufficient comprehension, one would naturally not be able to go too far and would definitely fall halfway. However, once a cultivator broke through the primordial grand Luo realm and stepped into the Sage-to-Be realm, all the paths of cultivation would be laid out clearly in front of him. If a cultivator wanted to continue cultivating, he would only need to keep moving forward along the path that he had determined in the beginning. Comprehension was naturally no longer important. Chapter 1176. When a cultivator stepped into the Sage-to-Be realm, he or she would have already determined the path he or she would take. Whether he wanted to become a sage by cutting the 3 corpses, or directly become a sage with endless Dharma power, or by some other unorthodox method of imprinting the primordial spirit, or what kind of 3 corpses he wanted to cut, good and evil, yin and yang, chaos or heaven, earth and man, would be determined once he stepped into the Sage-to-Be realm. After that, what he could do was to move forward step by step along this path. Even if his comprehension was excellent, he could only speed up the process a little. Even if his comprehension was not good enough, it was not impossible for him to achieve it overnight if he had the opportunity. Therefore, after a cultivator stepped into the Sage-to-Be realm, talent and comprehension were no longer important to him. At this realm, the most important thing was the opportunity and the concept. It had already been mentioned above about opportunities. Even for those with extremely poor comprehension ability, if they had an opportunity, it wasn't inconceivable for them to cross several small realms in a single night. In Luo Fan's understanding, the concept was the most important. From the moment a cultivator stepped onto the path of cultivation, it would be extremely useful. When one reached the Sage-to-Be realm and above, its importance would reach an astonishing height. It would directly surpass one's comprehension ability and even surpass one's luck. Among them, the most obvious one was the concept of the world. Why could Luo Fan reach the exceptional realm of Tao Master now? The most important reason was that he had sorted out and explained a world that was completely suitable for him. He could explain the heaven and earth, the state of chaos, and even the state before the state of chaos. It was because of this concept of the world that he could break through continuously from the innate zenith heaven realm to the current height at such a fast speed. As for other things like opportunities and comprehension, they were only secondary in comparison. Even without them, he would at most be a little slower, and he could still reach this step in the end. In contrast, Other cultivators were stuck in a bottleneck for billions of years. They could not break through a bottleneck for billions of years. Even the disciples of the sages, with the guidance of the sages and infinite resources, could finally reach a very high level. Only a few? That was the fundamental reason. It was because of this concept. It was precisely because they didn't understand the wonders of the world. It was precisely because their understanding of the world was inherited from the sages and the worldview that had been accumulated over the years. He twisted his own will to conform to this worldview. It was precisely because he knew that one's worldview was the most important that Luo Fan could casually chat with the air hostess about one's poor comprehension ability. Otherwise, if comprehension was really that important, even if Luo Fan knew that Kongnu was open-minded, he wouldn't have said this. Luo Fan and Sky Maiden didn't leave the mountain peak. They just sat on a mountain peak and quietly enjoyed the tranquil and pleasant time. Occasionally, he would talk about some interesting things that were happening somewhere. The two of them just sat there quietly, feeling extremely relaxed. They faintly felt that it wouldn't matter even if they sat there until the end of time. During this process, of course, Kongnu didn't stop her journey. Her incarnations were still experiencing all kinds of worldly things in the universe, seeking what she needed and sorting out her own worldview. The divine creation child didn't have the same interest as Kongnu and Luo Fan. After sitting there for a few months, he couldn't help it anymore. He directly turned into a divine creation hall and floated in the air while he himself fell into a deep sleep. He only left his incarnations above the cultivation country to continue enjoying the wonderful feeling of being the master behind the scenes of the country. Luo Fan and the Space Maiden sat like this for 3 years, and the cultivators gradually woke up. As soon as these cultivators woke up, they all revealed joyful expressions. They all felt that their states were completely different from before. Although their strength didn't increase by much, their potential was many times stronger than before. Their cultivation realm was also slightly loosening, as if there was a mysterious existence pushing their cultivation realm upward. It seemed that if they just relaxed a little, their cultivation realm would instantly soar to a height that they didn't even dare to imagine. This made them overjoyed. For a moment, they were all grateful to Luo Fan and prostrated themselves before Luo Fan, expressing their utmost gratitude. Luo Fan naturally didn't care about these cultivators. After giving them a few words of encouragement, he let them leave. These cultivators who woke up the fastest were naturally the weakest among the dozens of cultivators, be it in terms of comprehension, talent, or perception. However, they were the living beings that Luo Fan had enlightened in the past. After all, in the entire cultivation country, they were definitely at the highest level. It had been several years since the cultivation country lost its upper echelons. Although it wouldn't affect them in the short term, it would be troublesome if the upper echelons didn't appear for a long time. Luo Fan let them leave now so that they could pacify the entire cultivation country, so that the cultivation country wouldn't fall into chaos due to the absence of the upper echelons. The cultivators had just woken up, and they didn't even know how much time had passed. When they figured it out, they were all shocked. 3 years was naturally not a long time for them, but they had no concept of time at all during these 3 years. It felt like only a moment had passed, which naturally surprised them. When they looked at the changes in the world around them, their expressions changed even more. How did it become like this? The same thought flashed through their minds. The world in front of them was no longer the continent that they had worked together to build back then. No matter how they looked at it, that continent of theirs was so fragile that they didn't even dare to exert too much of their strength, afraid that the entire continent would collapse if they weren't careful. But at this moment, the continent in front of them was indescribably sturdy. They even sensed that. Even if they exhausted all their strength and blew up their bodies without any regard for their endurance, they might not be able to affect this world. They might not even be able to shake the space-time of this world. Such a huge change happened in the short span of 3 years. How unbelievable was this? How could they not care about it? These cultivators were inconspicuous among the many cultivators, but they were all extraordinary themselves. They naturally figured out what was going on very quickly, and for a moment, they felt endless gratitude and admiration for Luo Fan. At the same time, they also had indescribably bright thoughts about their future in cultivation. To be able to cause such a profound change in the entire continent in the short span of 3 years. Perhaps we can also do this in the future, filled with such longing and excitement. The cultivators all left the mountain with indescribable joy. In the following period of time, such a thing would happen every once in a while. When the last heavenly god woke up, he thanked Luo Fan. He turned around and left. It was already 30 years later. This time, it was exactly the same as what Luo Fan had guessed. When the last cultivator left, Luo Fan smiled at the air maiden and said, "Now that everything is done, what will happen to the cultivation nation in the future? It all depends on their luck. With their current accumulation, they should be able to make great progress in the next tens of thousands of years. It might be a little difficult to turn the entire universe into a cultivation universe in the future, but it shouldn't be a problem for them to gain a foothold in this universe and become a nation recognized by many technological nations." The air maiden nodded. That's enough. It's naturally best if they can turn the civilization path of the universe around in the future. Even if they can't, it doesn't matter. Luo Fan smiled. Now, the most important thing is to pass this trial path. Trial path. The air maiden's eyes were a little dazed. If not for Luo Fan's reminder, she would have probably forgotten that this universe was the trial path of the Xuanyu court. Everything that happened in this universe was really too rich for her. Be it in terms of cultivation or ideas, it made her feel a world of difference from when she was in the Xuanyu court. Occasionally, when she thought about it, she even felt that everything that happened in the Xuanyu court was something that happened in her previous life. After a while, the air maiden sighed and said, "After passing the trial path, it should be time to leave this universe. It should be possible to leave this universe. However, it might return to the outside world from time to time. It's still uncertain." Luo Fan smiled. However, this aroused the air maiden's curiosity. Why isn't it certain? Don't we return to the outside world after passing the trial path? How could there be other possibilities? The air maiden asked in surprise. Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "What is the demon realm? You should have heard of it, right?" "I've heard of it occasionally. It seems to be an extremely dangerous and sinister place. However, I don't know the specifics," the air maiden said doubtfully. "It's good that you've heard of it. That saves me a lot of trouble explaining." Luo Fan smiled and explained the situation of the demon realm, the calamity of the universe, and the abnormal situation in this universe to the air maiden without holding anything back. As Luo Fan explained, the air maiden's expression changed slightly. Sometimes she was surprised, sometimes she was in disbelief, and sometimes she was enlightened. However, she was no longer as calm and indifferent as she usually was. After a long time, the air maiden finally let out a long sigh and said, "I see. In that case, there might be a passage to the demon realm in this universe." "That's what I suspect for now," Luo Fan said with a smile. "Then, if there really is a passage to the demon realm, do we really have to enter it? According to what you said just now, the demon realm is an extremely dangerous place," the air maiden said with a frown. "Although the demon realm is dangerous, it is also an opportunity. The demon realm is a world created by a sage and transformed into a sage. However, it could give birth to a sage. There must be a great secret behind it. There might be an opportunity for us to become sages. No matter what, we can't let it go," Luo Fan explained. "But what if we enter and can't come back?" The air maiden was still a little worried. "If we can't come back, then we can't come back. What does it matter? Cultivating anywhere is the same. If we can't become sages in the future, it will be pointless to come back. Once we can become sages, will the demon realm still be an obstacle?" Luo Fan laughed. "That's true. Anyway, as long as I'm with you, it doesn't matter where I am." The air maiden smiled sweetly. The air maiden smiled. The air maiden suddenly thought of something and said, "Since there is a possibility of leaving this universe, why don't I stop traveling and take back my incarnation? Her incarnations were traveling around the universe with the help of the power of the divine creation boy. If they left this universe, the divine creation boy would naturally leave this universe with them. But obviously, the power of the divine creation boy was not able to transmit his power across the universe. If they left this universe, the power of the divine creation boy would lose its effect. If his incarnation stayed in this universe, wouldn't the connection with his body be completely cut off? Although it was not a big loss, but it was still a troublesome matter. There's no need to be so fast. Although we have found the source of the demon realm's aura, what is it? Is it really connected to the demon realm? How can we get through it? How can we leave? We don't have any rules for now. Even if we have to leave, it won't be very fast. You just need to continue traveling. When necessary, I will let you take back your incarnation, Luo Fan said with a smile. That's fine. Since you want to find the source of the demon realm's aura, I won't waste your time. How about I devote all my attention to the incarnation and make the best use of my time to gain experience? The Air Maiden thought for a moment and said, Up to you. Luo Fan just smiled. The Air Maiden nodded. Without any gesture of a woman in the secular world, she turned into a ray of light and rushed into the divine creation temple. As she rushed in, the divine creation temple shook slightly, attached to Luo Fan's body, and disappeared without a trace. Luo Fan smiled, lifted his foot, and stepped into his small stone house. After thinking for a moment, he patted the building that looked like a phone booth in front of the small stone house and gently sent it away from the small stone house, directly into a desolate place in this cultivation country. The building that looked like a phone booth was the house of the cultivator Shindeng, who was enlightened by Luo Fan after he entered the supreme divine land. It was also the house that Luo Fan had modified. In the past few years, many things had happened to Luo Fan, but Shindeng had remained unmoved in the house. No matter how Luo Fan had turned the world upside down outside, he just focused on cultivating. At this moment, compared to 1,000 years ago, Shindeng could be considered to have entered the door. Although he still had not comprehended the barrier and achieved the immortal path, he had basically cut off his dependence on the rules of the supreme divine land. He could be considered to have his own real power and was one step closer to creating living beings. When Luo Fan sent the phone booth into a desolate place in the cultivation country, the vibration and changes caused by the whole process did not pass into the space inside the building, so there was no reaction from Shindeng. However, after losing Luo Fan's protection, the space inside the building began to bear the pressure of the outside space. The crystal walls that made the phone booth began to gradually corrode and change. The changes of the crystal walls were naturally reflected in the space inside, causing all kinds of changes in the space inside. In a trance, the sound of lightning and thunder swept through the entire space, and even the energy that existed in the void began to fluctuate violently. Such a change had awakened Shindeng, who had been cultivating for 1,000 years. What's going on? Why is there such a sudden change? Shindeng opened his eyes in a daze and looked at the intense changes around him with a puzzled expression. After a while, he looked around again and was shocked. He jumped up and said, What's going on? Why is Sage gone? He was horrified and took a step forward. He did not make any movements, but strange threads appeared under his feet. Then, his figure appeared at the door of this space as if he had teleported. Just as he was about to open the door, Shindeng noticed the changes in himself, and his expression instantly became dull. This is a completely different power. Although it's much weaker in nature, I can use it like an extension of my arm, and it naturally permeates my mind. This is a power that truly belongs to me, a power that can change my fate. Shindeng's face was instantly covered in tears. What Luo Fan taught him was the method to truly transform the power of the rules of the law layer for his own use. If he cultivated this method to an extremely high level, he would naturally be able to use the power of the rules of the law layer at will, and the effect would definitely be better than directly borrowing the power of the rules of the law layer in the supreme divine land. In other words, if he could cultivate to an extremely high level, he felt that his power would definitely be much higher than when he directly used the power of the rules of the law layer in the past. However, at this moment, Shun Deng's cultivation realm had yet to break through from the mortal realm to the immortal realm. Even if the method that Luo Fan taught him was special, and he could already use the power of the rules of the law layer in this realm, the amount of power that he could use would definitely be extremely small, and the effect that he could display would definitely be extremely weak. In this way, Shun Deng clearly felt that the essence of this power was much weaker than the essence of the power that he could control in the past. Although this power was weak, it was cultivated by himself. It penetrated through his life source, communicated with his soul and body, and could gradually enhance the essence of his life, so that he could obtain true longevity without the blessing of the rules of the supreme divine land. Moreover, with such longevity, because his spirit grew along with it, his heart of longevity would naturally grow as well. Chapter 1177. In the short time that he paused, the changes in the space behind him had reached a peak, giving people a feeling that it was the end of the world. Faced with such changes, Shun Deng's heart turned cold. He no longer dared to hesitate. He opened the door and rushed in. The moment he stepped out of the building that looked like a phone booth, the building behind him that was made of crystal walls trembled slightly. Like a broken mirror, it collapsed bit by bit and turned into fine powder in the blink of an eye. The space inside the building was also released at this moment, directly intertwining with the surrounding space-time, resulting in all kinds of shocking collisions. An indescribable power erupted and directly sent Shun Deng flying, forcing him to use the power he had cultivated, which was not very powerful, to stabilize his body. He then landed on a mountain peak not far away. This was a barren land with mountains, forests, valleys, and all kinds of dangerous cliffs. Of course, it wasn't difficult to find a mountain peak to land on. Although Shun Deng safely landed on a mountain peak, he couldn't help but feel a lingering fear when he thought of how terrifying the impact was. He carefully observed the changes that occurred in his original position. He saw the space-time inside and outside colliding with each other. There was a vague, invisible ripple that spread out in all directions from where they intertwined. The various scenes and materials in the inner space were constantly thrown out during this process and were baptized by the outside space. Some of them completely collapsed, while others were preserved. Moreover, they had a faint brilliance, as if they had undergone some kind of extremely mysterious change. This process lasted for most of the day. By the time everything calmed down, the space-time in that location had undergone some extremely subtle changes compared to before. At first glance, it seemed no different from normal, but upon closer inspection, there seemed to be some kind of light that didn't originally belong to this continent. It was as if some special materials had been integrated into this continent's space-time. Looking at this scene, Shun Deng couldn't help but gape. His face was filled with disbelief. This spatial interference. The interior space is actually undamaged. Such a thought flashed through his mind. The materials that were thrown out. Almost all of them were materials that he had placed in his house. The ones that were instantly crushed were the ones with the worst quality. Those that were not crushed were instead glowing with a special light. It was a mysterious substance, even those with good quality. In other words, the expensive ones. Apart from that, everything in the inner space did not belong to him. It was the matter formed after the sage opened up the space-time. They were all firmly within the space-time and had not been thrown out at all. As for whether those substances had completely collapsed and disappeared during the previous reloading, there was no need to say more. At this moment, in that location, hidden behind the surface space-time, there was another space-time, a small world. That space-time, that small world, was the small world that Shun Deng had stayed in for about 1,000 years. In fact, he felt that he only needed a single thought to be able to directly enter the small world. This change was truly beyond his imagination. Although he did not know where he was or why he appeared here, the intense collision between the internal space-time and the external space-time and the shocking turbulence should have caused shocking damage, be it to the external space-time or the internal space-time. However, even after such a terrifying collision, The internal spacetime and the external spacetime were not damaged at all. The internal spacetime was still the same, and the external spacetime did not seem to be much different. How could he not be surprised? Shindeng thought about it and leaped up. There was an invisible force in the air that lifted him up, and he quickly flew toward a certain place in front of him. This speed was, of course, much slower than when he was sent flying by that terrifying force. However, the advantage of this flying method was that it was completely under his control. It was naturally a world of difference from the feeling of being thrown out. After landing in that location, Shundeng put away the remaining substances that were glowing with a mysterious light. With a thought, he entered the small world. As soon as he stepped in, Shundeng could not help but feel joy and shock. As expected, apart from the things that he had set up in the past that had disappeared, this small world looked exactly the same as what he had seen in the past 1,000 years or so. After a while, Shundeng sighed and said, "Lord Sage's means are so mysterious that I can only look up to you." To him, the current situation was, of course, the best. Although he did not know where he was, with such a small world for him to live in, his safety would be greatly guaranteed, and he would have a way out. At this moment, the most important thing for Shundeng was to cultivate and break through the barrier between the mortal realm and the immortal realm. He would obtain true longevity and be one step closer to being able to create life. Compared to this matter, everything else was secondary. Even if he was in a completely unfamiliar place and did not know how he got here, it was still secondary to him. He was just about to continue sitting cross-legged and cultivate. At this moment, a ray of light suddenly crossed the sky from afar and landed directly in the position where the small world was attached to. Just now, it was named as the aura of the crystal wall being melted and assimilated. Why can't I feel anything now? This person had the appearance of an old man, and he had a rather sage-like appearance. Shundeng, who was observing through the small world, could not help but have an inexplicable good impression of him. This person was none other than Shun Tun. Although Shun Tun was not the only cultivator who came from the Supreme Divine Land, he was the one with the highest cultivation realm among these cultivators. His status was also the highest, and he was also the highest in the entire cultivation country. As such, he could naturally use the sensing device of this cultivation country. Just now, he had used the sensing device to experience what the entire continent had become after the Immortal Elder had modified it, and what kind of incredible mysteries it had added. At this moment, he sensed an extremely familiar aura in this area that originally belonged to the wildlands. It was a mysterious aura that could only be emitted when the crystal wall of the Supreme Divine Land was melted on this continent. When he sensed this aura, two guesses flashed through his mind. The first was that a cultivator from a Supreme Divine Land had bypassed many defenses and landed on this continent. The second was that a cultivator who was a citizen of the Supreme Divine Land had landed on this continent. Regardless of which possibility it was, Shun Tun could not possibly ignore it. As such, that was why he personally came here. After all, this was a cultivation country. It was not an ordinary country. Even as the highest authority, he was most used to acting personally, rather than ordering an army or some sort of organization to investigate this place. Fortunately, I learned some techniques from the Immortal Elder's teachings. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be able to think of anything now, Shintun thought. An eager smile appeared on his face. Such a smile appeared on his sage-like face, but it also seemed a bit mischievous, making the usually calm Shintun look like an old urchin. He formed several tens of thousands of complicated hand seals with both hands, and the power within his body fluctuated intensely. It gathered towards his hands. After the power gathered in his hands, it began to undergo various subtle changes as he formed the complicated hand seals. After forming the last hand seal, Shun Tun shouted softly and released his hand seal. The change power suddenly rushed forward, turning into a fleeting, formless light, and suddenly entered the spot where the phone booth was. It was also the spot where Shun Tun sensed the most obvious familiar fluctuation. The moment the formless light entered the void, the void trembled. Then, the shadow of a small world appeared out of thin air and covered the surroundings. Even the spot where Shun Tun was standing was enveloped by the small world. At the same time, Shun Tun's figure appeared in the shadow of the small world. Coincidentally, he was right in front of Shun Tun. Shun Tun had already noticed that something was wrong when he made his move earlier. However, before he could react, he noticed the changes in his surroundings. He realized that the entire world seemed to have overlapped with the outside world, and the old man with white hair and a youthful face was standing right in front of him. He even felt like he could smell the old man's breathing. The sudden change shocked Shun Tun. Although he knew it was just an illusion, he could not help but take a few steps back. So, it's a fellow disciple. I thought you were an enemy. Friend, you must be a cultivator from the supreme divine land, right? I'm Shun Tun. Have you heard of me before? Shun Tun's eyes lit up when he saw the person, and he said with a smile. The moment he saw the person, he sensed a very familiar feeling from the person. It was a feeling that only cultivators had. Shun Tun immediately knew that the person was a cultivator who had embarked on the path of cultivation due to some kind of fortuitous encounter. Moreover, he was a cultivator from the supreme divine land. The cultivators in this cultivation country came from all over the universe, and there were very few cultivators from the supreme divine land. Under such circumstances, Shun Tun naturally treated Shun Tun more warmly than ordinary people who were also from the supreme divine land. Shun Tun's first impression was that as long as he said that, he would be able to completely avoid any misunderstanding and make the cultivator let his guard down. However, he did not think about Shun Tun's background. When Shun Tun's house was occupied by Luo Fan, he begged Luo Fan to teach him the method of cultivation. For the next 1,000 years, he did not leave the house at all and was completely isolated from the outside world. He did not even know where he was or why he was here. How could he know that there were shocking changes in the universe? How could he know that there was a cultivation country in the universe? In his mind, as a cultivator, he was the enemy of the entire universe. If his identity was exposed, he would be hunted down by the entire universe. In such a situation, having his true appearance called out and the fact that he was a cultivator exposed, the only emotion he would feel would naturally be panic and fear. Shun Tun did not carefully sense the aura of the person in front of him. In fact, with Shun Tun's cultivation realm of the quasi-sage stage, he could not sense any aura. Shun Tun had not broken through the mortal realm and had stepped into the immortal realm, so he naturally could not sense any aura. He instinctively used the method of borrowing the power of this small world to condense a powerful attack and blasted it at Shun Tun. Although the world where Shandang resided was only an extremely small world, it was still a small world after all. Moreover, it was a small world that Luo Fan had transformed. Its power was unimaginable. In an instant, a beam of light that was comparable to the power of the universe obliteration cannon appeared and blasted at Shun Tun. Fortunately, Shun Tun did not expect this person to suddenly attack him. However, Shun Tun's cultivation realm was too low. Although he used the power of the small world to launch such an attack, its speed was too slow and its trajectory was too easy to grasp. Therefore, Shun Tun's cultivation realm was too low. He took a step back. In the blink of an eye, he was hundreds of miles away. The beam of light that was comparable to the power of the universe obliteration cannon blasted the ground below without any reservation. In an instant, the entire valley was vaporized and disappeared without a trace. Even the surrounding mountain peaks collapsed in an instant, in the blink of an eye. Just like that, a beautiful natural landscape turned into a tragic scene of doomsday. Are you out of your mind? Shun Tun was frightened and angry. He had come to receive this person with good intentions, yet he was suddenly treated in such a manner. If he had dodged a little slower, he might not have died, but this body of his would not have been able to be used anymore. Although its power was comparable to the universe obliteration cannon, its area of effect was extremely small. Therefore, although the beam of light had destroyed the valley, it did not penetrate too deep and did not wreak havoc for too long. After a few dozen breaths, it gradually calmed down. He ran away. Shun Tun sensed the center of the attack and could not help but curse. At this moment, that place was completely empty. The trace of that small world had completely disappeared. In this situation, either the small world was completely annihilated by the previous attack and disappeared without a trace. Either that person took the small world and ran away. The first possibility was naturally impossible. Could it be that the attack triggered by the power of the small world would destroy the small world itself? Therefore, it could only be the second possibility. That person did not even dare to talk to Shin Tun and ran away. What a mess! Shin Tun's anger subsided when he saw this. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. He was a smart person who had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. After some thought, he knew why he was attacked by that person. He's so impatient at such a young age. Sigh, it took me so much effort to find someone from my hometown, but he ended up like this. It seems like it will be very difficult to find him in the future. Shun Tun sighed. He leaped into the air and turned into a ray of light. Soon, he disappeared from the destroyed valley. After understanding the misunderstanding, he no longer hoped to find that person in a short period of time. Based on that person's mentality, it would be fine if he did not find him. However, once he found him, he might attack him even if it would affect his future of cultivation. In the end, things would get out of hand. That was obviously not what he wanted to see. Therefore, he could only choose to leave and ignore that person to prevent the misunderstanding from worsening. As for whether that person would become his enemy and fight him in the future, he was not worried at all. There was no other reason than that person did not know the truth. Perhaps he would conceal his identity and cultivate in peace for a while. However, he would have to communicate with someone one day. Once he did, he would naturally find out what kind of country he was in, and what happened that day was a misunderstanding. By then, not only would that person not fight him, but he might even apologize to him because he felt guilty. Shun Tun left without any hesitation, but Shun Deng was in an extremely sorry state. The small world that he was in had moved randomly, and he had arrived at a place that was even more unfamiliar than before. This place was also in the wilderness, and it felt even more desolate than where he was previously. At the moment, he seemed to be in a terrible state. The acupuncture points all over his body were constantly spewing blood, and the power inside his body was on the verge of collapse. It felt as if it would explode at any time and tear his entire body into countless pieces. Although the small world he was in had not changed much, he felt that it was much more distant. It was as if the connection between him and the small world had become much thinner because of what he had done previously. The reason why he could enter this small world was that he had been in this small world when Luo Fan had transformed it. In addition, he had cultivated here for 1,000 years, so this small world had instinctively engraved a little mark of his. At this moment, this mark was still very faint. If he cultivated quietly in the future and continued to refine this small world, this mark would continue to deepen. In the end, one day, this small world would truly become his small world. However, due to the critical situation just now, he had directly guided the power of this small world to fight his enemy. Not only did the power backfire on his body, but it also washed away the mark that he had engraved on this small world. If he did not take any action, it would collapse completely in no time, and he would lose this small world completely. Chapter 1178. The misunderstanding between Shun Deng and Shun Tun caused him to be isolated from the world for a long period of time. It was not until a few years later, when he finally learned the truth, that he regretted being isolated from the world for such a long time. He felt that it was not worth it for him to be constantly worried and afraid. However, it was also because of this experience that his relationship with Shun Tun became extremely good. Luo Fan naturally did not care about anything that happened in the Cultivation Nation. Although he wanted to see how the entire universe would change under the Cultivation Nation, he was not in the mood to control and guide it bit by bit. In his opinion, he had already done all he could by staying in the Cultivation Nation for such a long time and remodeling it in such a manner. As for the countless cultivators in the cultivation country, he only saw them as juniors. He never saw them as his own disciples or his own sect. Due to this mentality, He would at most create some convenience for them to cultivate. He would not care about their lives, nor would he care about the grudges between them. At that moment, Luo Fan had already crossed a distance of billions of light years with the small stone house and entered the Supreme Divine Land. He had even directly entered the core region of the Supreme Divine Land and arrived at an extremely strange place. The core region of the Supreme Divine Land was rather vast, and there were even dozens of river systems within it. Because it was the core region of the Supreme Divine Land, it was an extremely vast star region. The degree of remodeling of the rules and laws was much deeper than that of the Supreme Divine Land outside. Outside the core region, if a citizen of the Supreme Divine Land could mobilize the power of the rules and laws as one, in that case, the power they could mobilize in the core region would be 10, or even 100, or even 1,000. Because the difficulty of mobilizing the power of the rules and laws had been reduced, the scene in the core region of the Supreme Divine Land was different from that of the outside world. Outside the core region, there were all sorts of things. There were buildings made of crystal walls. However, in the core region, there were many worlds made of crystal walls. These worlds were distributed in the seemingly boundless void of the universe. In comparison, the vast star region in the core region was like a boundless ocean, and the worlds were like islands on the ocean. These worlds were all different. However, to the outside world, they looked like huge, sparkling, and translucent crystals. There were many worlds densely connected together. They formed a huge crystal wall. They were also densely distributed in the void of the universe. The distance between the inner and outer regions of the core region wasn't too obvious. There wasn't even a huge crystal barrier that separated the Supreme Divine Land from the outside world. In fact, the only thing that separated the core region from the outside was the different depths of the Law Layer's transformation. This transformation was different. This caused the citizens outside the core region to be subjected to countless checks if they wanted to enter the core region. Once they did not have the qualifications to enter, they would naturally suffer the backlash of the entire layer of laws, and all of their existences would be instantly erased. It was precisely because of such strict restrictions that no one had ever dared to enter the core region without obtaining the qualifications. At this moment, Luo Fan was already a Dao master at the exceptional realm. He could sense almost every detail of the universe. As for the source of the demonic world's aura in this universe, he naturally knew very well. At this moment, although there were all kinds of mysteries in the core region that interested him, he did not hesitate at all. Instead, he directly headed for the source of the demon realm aura that he had sensed. As for the countless checks in the core region, for him, it was not much different from a light breeze. It did not bring him any pressure at all, and it would not let him be discovered by the Supreme Divine Land's higher-ups. The source of the demon realm aura was not in the center of the core region, but in a position near the center. There was a considerable deviation from the center. Luo Fan's speed was extremely fast. In a short while, he had already arrived at the source of the demon realm aura. Sure enough, although the Supreme Divine Land can't fully understand the essence of the source of the aura, it still knows that this place is extraordinary. Such thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind as he drove the small stone house to float in the void of the universe. The source of the aura was tens of thousands of light years in front of him. However, Luo Fan could not see the source of the aura at all from where he could see it. In that place, there were countless crystal wall worlds that formed a huge crystal wall system. Although each of these gray space worlds were created by a technological civilization and were incomplete worlds, these worlds were connected to the laws of the world. The boundless power of the laws of the world was used to maintain these worlds, making these worlds look as if they were truly complete. The source of the Devil World's aura was hidden in one of the countless crystal wall worlds. Among these countless crystal wall worlds, every single one of them was a world with a round sky and a square earth. Every single world was extremely vast. Although they could not be as vast as the solar system, they could at least accommodate 1 or 2 suns. There were billions and billions of living beings living within. So this is the magic civilization. Luo Fan looked at these worlds and couldn't help but smile inexplicably. Each of these crystal wall worlds had their own unique laws and laws. This also caused the civilizations in each crystal wall world to have their own unique characteristics. On the whole, even though these civilizations had their own unique characteristics, they all seemed to be walking the path of the legendary magic civilization. There were all kinds of magic in these crystal wall worlds. There was even fighting spirit. They looked like the legendary foreign continents. And the citizens of the supreme divine lands were like gods in these continents. They received the respect of all living beings on those continents and enjoyed their faith. In turn, this faith was used on their crystal wall worlds, making them stronger and larger. With a slight thought from Luo Fan, the situation inside the crystal wall world was instantly clear to him. Due to the differences in the laws of the gray space realms, the magic civilizations they developed were also different. Some were rough, some were fine. The rough ones were the magic civilizations that used various elements such as metal, wood, water, fire, earth, light, and dark. And those fine ones, that was the magic civilization that used transmutation, defense, necromancy, and all sorts of other magical phenomena, and so on and so forth. All sorts of strange and wondrous things. But no matter what kind of magic civilization it was, even if those magicians could form their own godhood, thus, they could become immortal magic civilizations. But in essence, it was a technological civilization. All of their power came from the crystal wall worlds. All of their achievements came from the transformation of the laws and laws of the universe outside. In other words, if the entire Supreme Divine Land was a computer, then the gray space worlds were equivalent to games installed on the computer. Those living beings that obtained unparalleled power and immortality in those worlds were the same as obtaining power and immortality in those games. Strictly speaking, they were illusory existences. As long as the master of the crystal wall worlds wanted to, he could instantly strip them of their power and destroy their immortality. This is their game. Luo Fan could not help but sigh. Given the supreme divine land's level of technology, and given their current state, it was natural for them to be addicted to such games. The citizens of the supreme divine lands all had eternal life. To them, survival and lifespan were no longer limiting factors. They were born in this universe, and the only thing they needed to do was to enjoy life. To enjoy life, to enjoy the wonders that technology brought, and to enjoy the comfort that came with eternal life. With such enjoyment, they could create a world to play in and let themselves be the supreme god of this world. So what? Luo Fan stepped out of the small stone house. As he stepped out, the small stone house behind him instantly collapsed and then completely melted into the void. This was not Luo Fan's action. It was not that Luo Fan had destroyed the small stone house before leaving, but that the small stone house had not been registered in the core region of the Supreme Divine Lands. The rules and laws in the core region of the Supreme Divine Lands could not accommodate the existence of the small stone house. After losing Luo Fan's protection, it instantly exploded with endless power and directly destroyed the small stone house. Luo Fan looked back at the small stone house and shook his head. He did not stop moving. With a light step, he had already crossed a distance of tens of thousands of light years and stepped in one of the crystal wall worlds in the huge crystal wall system. He had come here, following the guidance of the source of the demonic aura. Although there were so many crystal wall worlds here that formed such a huge crystal wall system, it did not affect him at all. He did not need to search at all to determine where the source of the demonic aura was. Why would he need to search so many crystal wall worlds like finding a needle in a haystack? This crystal wall world was located in the center of the entire crystal wall system. It was also the largest crystal wall world in the entire crystal wall system. In comparison, even the worlds that were second only to this crystal wall world in the crystal wall system were not even half the size of this crystal wall world. In this crystal wall world, Luo Fan could sense an extremely strange aura. This aura seemed to be very weak, but the occasional fluctuations had astonishing power vibrations. It even had a feeling that it could affect the entire universe, causing subtle changes in the entire universe. I did not expect you to arrive here so quickly, friend. I did not make too many preparations. Please forgive me, friend. The moment Luo Fan stepped into this crystal wall world, an extremely old, even decaying voice reached Luo Fan's ears. With a thought, Luo Fan found the source of this voice, and he could not help but reveal an inexplicable smile on his face. This crystal wall world was extremely vast, and there were more than 1,000 continents. The area of each continent was much larger than an ordinary star, which was the sun in the solar system that Luo Fan was most familiar with. There were more than 1,000 continents. The combined area had reached a shocking level. Outside of these continents, there was also an ocean that was more than 10 times the size of the continents. When added together with the area of the continents, it reached an unbelievable height, causing the entire crystal wall world to seem boundless. Although the laws and regulations of this crystal wall world were the most deeply modified, they appear to be similar to the laws and regulations of the outside world outside the supreme divine land. At first glance, it was as if he had arrived outside the supreme divine land. Under such laws and regulations, the 1,000 continents in this crystal wall world had developed more than 1,000 types of magic civilizations. These magic civilizations, every one of them had something in common with the others. However, every one of them had their own characteristics and emphasis. Some focused on the development of the body, some on the development of the soul, and some on the development of machinery. Some focused on the development of magic formations. Some focused on the modification of the body. There were all sorts of them. There were so many that it was almost dazzling. At this moment, the voice that entered Luo Fan's ears did not come from any of the 1,000-odd continents. Instead, it came from above, from a small floating island at the top of this crystal wall world. This island was not big. It was only a few kilometers in radius. However, it was built from the highest grade of crystal wall that Luo Fan had seen after entering the supreme divine land. The entire island seemed ordinary, but its value was not much less than this vast crystal wall world. Great sage, Luo Fan murmured. He lifted his foot and took a step forward. His figure had already crossed the void and arrived on the island. On this island, there was a villa that was neither too big nor too small, standing in the center. In front of this villa, there was an extremely old man standing there. This old man's eyes were deep and unfathomable, and the light that shone from them made Luo Fan feel that it contained all the gratitude and hatred of the human world, birth, aging, sickness, and death, as well as all the knowledge and wisdom in the universe. The old man looked at Luo Fan and said with a smile, "I've been looking forward to this day for tens of billions of years. I'm actually a little nervous now." The old man looked at Luo Fan and said with a smile, "Nice to meet you. My name is Luo Fan. How should I address you, friend?" Luo Fan came before the old man and said with a smile, "My name? For tens of billions of years, people have called me the Great Sage. I can't seem to remember what my real name is." "That's right, I remember now. I think I'm called Sheng." "That should be right," the old man said as he pondered. "Sheng? That's a domineering name," Luo Fan praised. "I haven't had anyone come here for billions of years. I'm really happy to see you today. Why don't you come in and have a seat?" Sheng said with a smile. His every move and every word seemed to be done according to his heart's desire, but it also seemed to contain an extremely strict set of rules, giving off a very strange feeling. It was as if his every move was a set of rules. That's exactly what I was thinking. Since Luo Fan had come here, he was naturally curious about this person. How could he reject this suggestion? He nodded immediately. Sheng was overjoyed and led Luo Fan into the villa. The inside of the villa was very different from the outside. Inside the villa, the layer of laws seemed to be suppressed by a terrifying force. It was extremely calm, not even as lively as the layer of laws outside the supreme divine land. Even a cultivator would have to reach the immortal realm to be able to mobilize such a layer of laws. If a resident of the supreme divine land were to step into this place, it would be impossible for them to do so unless they were already cultivators. The entire villa looked extremely ordinary, and there was nothing special about it. The household appliances could not even compare to the internal structure of any house in the supreme divine land. Instead, it looked like the residence of an ordinary person who was still in the stage of a planetary civilization. Of course, this conclusion had to be made without considering the fact that the quality of the crystal walls was higher than all the crystal walls that Luo Fan had seen. Sheng looked at Luo Fan's strange expression and said with a smile, "I'm getting old. I'm always immersed in the past and can't extricate myself from it. Is this the residence of the supreme divine land from billions of years ago? It doesn't seem very technologically advanced," Luo Fan said with a smile. "My status was actually very high tens of billions of years ago, so this place was actually quite advanced back then." Sheng led Luo Fan to the chairs in the living room and sat across from each other. The chairs were extremely comfortable. Sitting down made one feel like they were in space. Their bodies were extremely relaxed and stretched out. This living room was, of course, completely different from the living rooms of villas that Luo Fan had seen on Earth. This place seemed more dignified, and the layout of the space was more reasonable. It did not give off the feeling of emptiness and loneliness. Whether it was one person, two people, or more people, there would not be any unnatural feeling here. It would not be crowded, nor would it be empty. Holiness casually waved his hand, and the law layer, which seemed to have been suppressed by something and had become extremely calm and difficult to mobilize, trembled slightly. Then, all sorts of powers gathered, forming all sorts of fruits and other food on the table between the two of them. Sheng smiled and said, "It's been a long time since we had a guest. Please forgive us for our negligence." Chapter 1179. You flatter me. I've lived for so long that I have to find something to do when I'm bored. I just happened to delve a little deeper into it. The saint chuckled. This saint had been alive since the supreme divine land had truly taken off from the very beginning until now. This period of time was at least tens of billions of years. As for how many years it had been, Luo Fan did not ask, and the saint himself did not say. After all, for an existence that had lived for tens of billions of years, every year was equivalent to every second for an ordinary person. Of course, an ordinary person would not be able to constantly calculate how many seconds they had lived since they were born. When Luo Fan heard what the saint said, he smiled and said, "To be able to live for tens of billions of years with the mentality of an ordinary person, even I am in awe of such a mind." The mentality of an ordinary person? I am an ordinary person to begin with, so of course my mentality is that of an ordinary person. Naturally, I cannot compare to you high and mighty cultivators, the saint said with a smile. Luo Fan chuckled and casually picked up the melon and fruit juices that the saint had created through the power of the laws. He took a bite and felt an indescribable deliciousness spread out from his mouth, making him feel like he was about to tremble. Very delicious. To be able to integrate the laws of taste into it. Friend, these past few years have been quite boring. Luo Fan did not hold back and directly commented. For this saint to be able to live for so long with the mentality of an ordinary person, his mind was naturally extremely firm. What Luo Fan said might make ordinary people angry, but to the saint, it was like a cool breeze caressing his face. It did not leave a single trace in his heart. After living for so many years, what had he not seen? How could he let something like this affect his mood? It really was boring. For tens of billions of years, even though the pace of life in the supreme divine land was slow, even though I could casually create world to pass my time, I still almost couldn't take it and wanted to commit suicide tens of thousands of times. If it wasn't for the support of an obsession in my heart, friend, you would definitely not be able to see me today. The saint sighed. His manner, his actions, his expression, all of them were free to do as he pleased. It was like a spring breeze. "Oh, what is your obsession?" Luo Fan couldn't help but be curious. What kind of obsession could make a person live for tens of billions of years with the mentality of an ordinary person and even make him suffer a mental breakdown tens of thousands of times? The saint smiled and said, "This obsession is actually the reason why I invited you here today. If not for this obsession, given the rejection of cultivators in this universe, considering the dangers that cultivators might face, there's no way I would invite a friend here. Friend, I'm even more curious now." Luo Fan couldn't help but be more interested when he heard that. "Before I talk about my obsession, I wonder if my friend can answer a small question for me?" God suddenly said. "Go ahead." Luo Fan naturally didn't care. If he hadn't reached the peak of Tao Master before, he would have died. He might even be worried about the super civilizations in this universe, worried about the attacks they could unleash, and worried about the damage they could bring to him. But when he reached the peak of Tao Master Realm, he no longer had to worry about anything in this universe. When he could instantly sense almost every detail of the entire universe and find what he was looking for, the source of the aura of the demon realm in this universe, he understood that there was no power in this universe that could threaten him. Even the technological creations that could destroy or completely shatter the entire universe were no threat to him. Even if the universe collapsed and perished for him, he only needed to casually drill into the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos, completely avoiding the fluctuations caused by the destruction of the universe. Once he entered the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos, he would be like a dragon entering the sea. He would no longer be restrained by all the shackles of this universe and directly pass this trial in some other way. However, if he did this, he wouldn't have the opportunity to study the source of the aura of the demon realm, and he wouldn't be able to seize the opportunity to enter the demon realm. However, after all, there was no danger to his life, so he could naturally get along with the experts in this universe more freely. Although the essence of the divine was just an ordinary person, his use of the rule of law had already surpassed all limits. He didn't need to be in the supreme divine land to be able to use it. Once he exerted his full strength and mobilized the power of the rule of law, he could instantly destroy the entire supreme divine land. To destroy the entire universe, although it would be a little more troublesome, it would only take him a few more days. This kind of strength was also the source of the divine's confidence. This was also the reason why he could face Luo Fan so casually. The two of them each had their own strengths and were extremely confident that they could protect themselves in the worst situation. When they got together, this scene in the world of the crystal wall was what was happening. When the divine heard that, Luo Fan agreed without hesitation. There was a hint of a smile in his eyes, and he said, "I want to know, my friend, what is your ultimate purpose in coming to this universe?" "My ultimate purpose in coming here?" Luo Fan was slightly stunned, and then he smiled. He didn't expect that the divine's question would be so direct. However, he didn't need to hide his purpose in coming to this universe at this time. Thus, he smiled and said, "My most direct purpose in coming to this universe is to find the source of this world's abnormalities. And the most fundamental purpose is to find a door to another world." Find the source of the abnormalities? Find the door. The divine's eyes instantly emitted an almost fanatical glow. This kind of glow was incompatible with his original temperament, making him look like two completely different people. Luo Fan saw this and knew this was the divine's true appearance. This kind of expression, full of obsession and fanaticism, was the expression that a person with an obsession that hadn't faded for tens of billions of years should have. If this person's true appearance was like before, as if he had seen through everything, as if he had infinite wisdom, then Luo Fan believed that he would either become a true cultivator or he would see through everything and commit suicide in the next moment. There was definitely no third possibility. And obviously, this divine in front of him was not a cultivator, and he wouldn't commit suicide in the next moment. You also discovered the abnormalities in this universe. The divine spat out these words that slightly surprised Luo Fan. Luo Fan looked at the divine's burning eyes and that fanatical expression. He couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. This was the divine's wisdom. It was really beyond imagination. No wonder he could become a supreme great sage in a super nation like the supreme divine land. No wonder he could live for tens of billions of years with the mentality of an ordinary person. He could actually rely on the concept of a non-cultivator. He found the abnormalities in this universe. This was simply sensational news. I originally thought you were just an ordinary old man who didn't die. I didn't expect you to surprise me. An ordinary person. To be able to discover the abnormalities in this universe with just your own observation, this is really amazing. Luo Fan exclaimed in admiration. Answer me. Why is there abnormality in this universe? Why are there only so many life-bearing planets in the universe? Why are all the intelligent beings in the universe humanoid? Why is this place the center of the universe? The divine didn't hesitate to ask a bunch of questions. Oh, why do you think these are abnormalities? Isn't the normal universe supposed to be like this? Luo Fan was quite curious as to how this person had discovered that these were different from the normal universe. After all, this person was just an ordinary person. Although he had incredible power, it was impossible for him to see other universes, and it was impossible for him to discover what the normal universe was like. Under such circumstances, how could he discover the abnormalities in these points of the universe through all these changes? There really are abnormalities. That means my deduction is correct. From Luo Fan's attitude, the divine already knew that his guess was correct. The abnormalities he had discovered over the years were indeed the real abnormalities. He muttered to himself. His expression seemed to be a little excited, but also a little perplexed. It was a little desolate and unimaginably complicated. He stared blankly for a good while in this state. Finally, he sighed and said, "When the Supreme Divine Land was first established, I was just a small scientist, or rather, a whimsical researcher." Luo Fan nodded and listened as the divine began to talk about his past. It was the past of tens of billions of years ago. Tens of billions of years ago, the Supreme Divine Land was just a small county. Of course, this kind of county was a county in this universe. In other universes, it was just a river system. There were countless counties like this in the universe, almost reaching the limit of the number of them. The divine was a scientist in this small county. As a scientist, the divine's scientific attainments were not that extraordinary. In the entire county, he was only at an average level. However, compared to other scientists, the divine was more of an investigative spirit. He spent tens of thousands of years thinking, experimenting, wanting to find the truth of the universe, wanting to find the true origin of the universe. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, he did not find the origin of the universe in the end. However, he discovered the abnormality of the universe. Based on his research on the various phenomena of the universe in those tens of thousands of years, he discovered that the universe seemed to be controlled by a terrifying power. It was this power that gave the universe an astonishing order. It was this power that caused the countless phenomena in the universe that were different from the results of his calculations. According to the various data that he had calculated, the universe should not be like this. The universe should be many times more desolate and chaotic than it was now. According to his calculations, any galaxy that could have thousands of naturally produced habitable planets could already be considered a galaxy that was full of vitality. It was impossible for every solar system to have habitable planets, and the number of habitable planets in any galaxy had to reach a terrifying level of hundreds of billions. Similarly, according to his calculations, the intelligent life forms born on any two life-bearing planets were bound to be vastly different. Even if they were of similar height, they could be considered twins. It was impossible for the intelligent life forms born on every life-bearing planet in the entire universe to be humanoid. Back then, Holiness was not as confident as he was now. Therefore, he was not confident in the results that he had calculated for tens of thousands of years. He directly overturned this result and started calculating from a different angle, spending another tens of thousands of years. Finally, he calculated the final result. And this result, it was exactly the same as what he had calculated tens of thousands of years ago. There was not the slightest difference at all. At this time, No matter how unconfident Holiness was, he knew that his calculations were correct. This universe. Indeed, there was a huge abnormality. When I discovered this point, Holiness almost lost his desire to live. To him, this discovery was like suddenly discovering that he was a marionette. All of his actions and actions were under the control of some kind of existence. His emotions were merely the will of others. Even his pursuit of the truth might have been deliberately revealed by that existence. This kind of feeling really made him feel extreme despair. Fortunately, he was able to spend such a long time calculating this result. His will was rather firm. In the end, he gathered his desire to live again and set a new goal. That was to find the source of this abnormality. And to find the source, he needed a long lifespan. Therefore, he began to study the truth of the universe according to his calculations. To a technological civilization, the truth of the universe that he calculated was the same as the great Tao to a cultivator of the cultivation civilization. Therefore, with the help of this calculation, it only took a few hundred years for Holiness to invent the technology to modify the rules and laws. This allowed their county to rapidly grow stronger. Finally, after a long period of development, it occupied the center of the universe that Holiness calculated and grew into the superpower that it was today, the supreme divine land. What a powerful obsession! Luo Fan could not help but sigh as he listened to Holiness's narration of his past. In order to find the source of the abnormality, he created the most powerful superpower in the entire universe. If such an astonishing obsession was used on cultivation, although it could not guarantee that he would reach the saint realm, it would definitely not be a problem for him to become a peak quasi-saint. Although Holiness had downplayed the process of the supreme divine land, growing from a small county to the terrifying superpower that it was today, what kind of person was Luo Fan? How could he not know how difficult it was? How could he not understand the many inspiring and tragic things that had happened in the process? If Holiness's obsession was not strong enough, the supreme divine land would not have been able to reach its current scale. The biggest possibility was that it would have lost confidence and fallen before it could become a high or medium country. Friend, please tell me, why is there an abnormality in this universe? What's that door? Holiness stared at Luo Fan with a burning gaze as he spoke in a deep voice. Luo Fan did not mind Holiness's somewhat impolite attitude. His temperament had long passed the level where he would be swayed by such words. Although Holiness's attitude was impolite, it could not sway his temperament. Since you built this world here, you must know that the source of the abnormality is here, right? Luo Fan said with a smile. The source of the demonic aura was in this crystal wall world. Moreover, it happened to be in the center of this crystal wall world. However, it was not above the surface, but underground. It was unknown how deep it was. As Luo Fan spoke, he turned his gaze towards that location with a faint smile on his face. Holiness took a deep breath. Using his temperament that he had cultivated for billions of years, he finally calmed down. His expression also returned to its original calm. That's right. I calculated for hundreds of millions of years to calculate that this is the center of the universe, the core of the core. All the abnormalities in the universe are in a sphere with this place as the center. Holiness nodded and said calmly, "It really is here," Luo Fan said with a smile. "You were able to calculate this location so accurately. It really surprises me. If it wasn't for the fact that you have never left this universe in your life, perhaps you would have already figured out its location. According to my calculations, there are indeed countless other universes that exist, but my accumulated technology is not enough. With my accumulated technology, it is impossible to break through the barrier of this universe and enter other universes. There is no way around it," Holiness said. "It is not a problem of insufficient technology, but a problem of this universe. With the technology of the supreme divine land, at least 90% of the other universes that I know of would not be able to stop you from breaking through," Luo Fan said with a smile. "So that is the case." Holiness was stunned for a while, then a faint, bitter smile appeared on his face. Luo Fan did not waste any time and immediately revealed the mystery. The abnormality of this universe lies in the fact that it is filled with the aura of another universe. Another universe? Holiness was stunned. Impossible. We are all universes. Why would the aura of another universe cause such abnormality in our universe? I don't believe it. Chapter 1180. High-level universe. Saint was stunned again. So that's how it is. I was stupid. How could I not have thought of it? Everything has a high level and a low level, and the universe is naturally the same. Looks like that door is the door to the high-level universe. He muttered to himself. His expression kept changing, and an indescribable desire gradually appeared on his face. This desire was so strong that it completely suppressed all the cultivation he had accumulated over the past tens of billions of years. It made him look so ferocious. Success is because of Xiao He. Failure is also because of Xiao He. Although such a strong obsession can allow one to reach an extremely high realm in cultivation, it is also because of this realm that he will never be able to set foot on the true peak. When Luo Fan saw Saint's appearance, such a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. He did not feel too much disgust towards Saint. On the contrary, he felt a sense of admiration. After all, he thought to himself that if he had lived for hundreds or thousands of years before he embarked on the path of cultivation, he would probably have collapsed due to the world around him becoming more and more unfamiliar. However, the person in front of him had such a state of mind. He had watched everything he was familiar with gradually disappear and lived for billions of years. This kind of endurance was not something Saint could hope to match. In the face of such a situation, the only thing he could do was, of course, the scene in front of him. Although Luo Fan was a little wary of the power that Saint had now grasped, he was only wary. He was not afraid at all. He did not think that the power that Saint had grasped could harm him. With such a state of mind and such confidence, he behaved so casually towards Saint. After a while, Saint came back to his senses and smiled at Luo Fan. "Sorry, I forgot myself." "It's understandable," Luo Fan said with a faint smile. "I wonder what the aura of the high-level universe is like." "Friend, do you have a way to let me feel that aura?" Saint asked. "Feel that aura? That might be a little troublesome. Although you have a terrifying power that can even destroy the universe, you do not cultivate." However, he doesn't know how to cultivate and is essentially immortal. The level of his aura is far too high for you. It exceeds the limits of your senses. Luo Fan thought about it. Is there no way? Is there really no other way? God said in disappointment. There's always a way. With your current appearance, if you were to transform into a cultivator, you wouldn't be able to survive. His improvement speed would definitely be extremely fast. It won't be long before you reach the level where you can sense this kind of aura, Luo Fan said with a smile. He said so. However, it was also on a whim. He wanted to see what kind of effect such a powerful existence would have on the universe after he transformed into a cultivator. With his divine identity, with his power, it must have an extremely close and mysterious connection with this universe. This connection was enough to cause all the changes that happened to the divine to be reflected on the entire universe, causing the entire universe to change because of his changes. I wonder if this will be the result. Will the laws of the entire universe change because of this? Will the original universe of science and technology directly become the universe of cultivation? Such thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind. Become a cultivator. Holiness's eyes suddenly became somewhat vacant. He had never thought about such a thing. After living for tens of billions of years, he had long since thought it through. What cultivation could bring him was nothing more than lifespan and power. For him, the power he currently possessed and the lifespan he possessed had already reached unimaginable heights. He did not need cultivation to bring him these things. It was precisely because of this that he had never thought that one day he would become a cultivator and embark on the path of cultivation. At this moment, the most powerful cultivator he had ever known in his tens of billions of years had placed this choice in front of him. He had to choose to cultivate in order to sense the aura he had pursued for tens of billions of years, or to persevere on the path of science and technology and cast aside his pursuits for tens of billions of years. The result of this choice was very obvious. For an existence who could live for tens of billions of years as an ordinary person because of a bit of obsession, his obsession was the most important thing for his survival. For his obsession, regardless of the difference between a civilization of science and a civilization of cultivation, regardless of the abnormalities of the universe, regardless of the true culprit behind the destruction of the universe, everything was so fragile. In the span of a few breaths, Holiness instantly cast everything aside and said, "Friend, please teach me. You are the most straightforward of all the living beings I have enlightened over the years." Luo Fan could not help but exclaim in admiration. The most straightforward? Perhaps in their eyes, I am the most straightforward trader. Holiness sighed, but there was no hesitation on his face. There was no shame, and there was no regret. Luo Fan chuckled and raised his hand. The extremely calm layer of laws and laws changed naturally, directly condensing into a dense expanse of words in the void. These words were written in a language that Holiness had never seen before. However, the information within these words was clear to Holiness the moment he saw them. It was as if these words had already been engraved in the depths of his soul. What he needed to do now was to take these words out again. Originally, for Holiness, who had an indescribable thirst for knowledge, when he saw these unfamiliar words, the most important thing he should do was to start studying these words. Through the structure and form of these words, he should search for the face of the civilization behind these words, as well as the characteristics of the civilization behind these words. However, the moment he saw these words, he completely forgot what he should normally do. He was completely immersed in the information recorded in these words. This was because he discovered that the information contained a deeper and more complex mystery than the civilization of the words themselves. Compared to this mystery, everything else in these words was not even worth mentioning. It turns out that I have always been a frog at the bottom of a well. Holiness sighed after a long while. He was also the first person in this universe to be able to remain clear-headed after seeing the technique that Luo Fan had imparted to him. He was the only living being that did not immediately immerse himself in cultivation. It's just that the paths we took were different. Cultivation civilizations, technological civilizations, each has their own strengths, and each has their own emphasis. Luo Fan smiled faintly. Holiness sighed. "Now, perhaps I should also address you as a mortal elder." As he said this, he bowed to Luo Fan as a way of thanking him for imparting the technique to him. Naturally, Luo Fan did not mind at all. He did not decline, nor was he pleased with himself. He only looked at him with an extremely calm expression. After bowing, Holiness closed his eyes and began to cultivate the technique that Luo Fan had imparted to him. This cultivation technique was specially created by Luo Fan for Holiness's situation. It was already sufficiently mysterious. If it was given to a cultivator to cultivate, it would be enough to become a technique that would be passed down through the ages. It would be enough to be considered a classic. This kind of technique completely targeted the state of Holiness. It could allow Holiness to unleash his own control over the laws and laws to the extreme. The first step of cultivation, it was to completely cut off the surrounding laws and directly absorb them into one's body. Then, it would change the nature of one's body, allowing one's life essence to grow from a mortal state to a body of laws, becoming a different kind of immortal body. In other words, for ordinary people and cultivators, just getting started with this kind of cultivation technique will be enough to stop them from getting started for the rest of their lives. Even for the citizens of the supreme divine land, doing this was not easy. The difficulty was unimaginably high. However, for Holiness, who was the great sage of the supreme divine land, it was really as simple as breathing. In just a breath's time, Holiness had instantly absorbed the vast area of laws outside, the huge crystal wall, into his body. He was the great sage of the supreme divine land. Although he had an indescribable obsession that suppressed everything, he still had deep feelings for the supreme divine land. Naturally, He had deep feelings for the crystal wall world and the crystal wall system that he had created. However, if he were to cut off and absorb the laws and laws of the crystal wall world, there would only be one result, and that was the complete destruction of the crystal wall world and the collapse of the entire crystal wall. Therefore, he could not directly cut off and absorb the laws and laws of the crystal wall world. Instead, he would shift his target of interception and absorption to the outside world, outside the crystal wall. Anyway, to him, it did not matter where the laws and laws of the supreme divine land were. As long as the distance was not too exaggerated, he did not care about it. Although the laws and laws of the supreme divine land and the outside world were essentially the same as the laws and laws of the crystal wall, due to the difference in scale, their recovery abilities were also different. After Holiness had cut off the laws and laws of the supreme divine land for tens of thousands of light years, there was an extremely intense chaos. Countless unbelievable lights and shadows formed in the cosmic void, almost forming the same scene as the Forbidden Zone outside the core region. However, unlike the Forbidden Zone, this was the core region, and the Supreme Divine Land's modification of the laws and laws of the Supreme Divine Land was even deeper. Very soon, all these changes completely calmed down, and the entire void returned to its original empty state, as if nothing had happened. After absorbing the laws and laws of the region that spanned tens of thousands of light years, Holiness did not directly use them to change the essence of his body. Instead, he began to change the laws and laws, gradually eliminating the changes that the Supreme Divine Land had made to the laws and laws of the Supreme Divine Land. In fact, he did not just eliminate them. He also continuously eliminated the parts of the laws and laws that he had researched over the years that did not conform to his calculations. The result of this elimination was that the laws and laws of the Supreme Divine Land had not been changed by the aura of the demon realm, and they gradually approached the true laws and laws of the natural universe. Of course, Holiness was only making changes according to his calculations, and he did not really know what the true laws and laws of the natural universe looked like. Even though he had been calculating for tens of billions of years, it was impossible for him to be perfect. Therefore, his changes to the laws and laws of the natural universe had its limits, as well as its omissions. In the end, the result was only extremely similar. It was just an extremely close result. Luo Fan could not help but shake his head and laugh as he watched the entire process. Forget it. I'll help you out. This thought flashed through his mind. He raised his hand and pointed at Holiness, who was sitting in front of him. In an instant, Holiness felt a boundless power rush into his body and wipe the laws and laws that he had absorbed. The laws and laws that he had absorbed reached his final goal in an instant, directly reaching the ultimate appearance that he could only get close to after calculating for tens of billions of years. Holiness could not help but feel extremely shocked. There was a sense of satisfaction. There was also a sense of emptiness, as well as a sense of loss. Just as he was feeling conflicted, the power that had helped him reach his goal withdrew slightly and left. It disappeared without a trace. It was as if it had never appeared. Luo Fan naturally knew what the laws and laws of the universe that had not been affected by the aura of the demonic realm looked like. It smoothed out the changes in the laws and laws of the universe that had been affected by the aura of the demonic realm. To him, it was just a matter of lifting a finger. Since it was a matter of lifting a finger, he naturally did as he pleased. He did not have too many obligations to Holiness, and it was normal for him to not care about what Holiness did. But with such a carefree attitude, he had such an impulse in his heart, so he naturally helped Holiness. As for why Holiness had such complicated emotions, there was no need to say more. The goal that he had painstakingly calculated for hundreds of years and could only get close to, but not reach, was actually achieved by someone else with just a matter of lifting a finger. No matter who it was, they would have such complicated emotions. However, Holiness's state of mind was astonishing, and he very quickly recovered. He began to follow the method that Luo Fan had imparted to him, and use these laws and laws to change his body, to change his spirit, and to condense the power contained in them within his body. To him, such a change was a change in the very nature of life. It instantly immersed him in a realm that he had never felt in his tens of billions of years of life. An indescribable sense of comfort enveloped him. It was as if the true principles of the universe were directly placed in front of him, allowing him to take whatever he wanted. Every moment, he felt as if the profound mysteries of the laws of nature, which he previously only knew but did not know why, were being born in his heart. It was a feeling that he was the laws, that he was the laws, that the laws were him, and that the laws were him. He could not help but shed hot tears. While he was immersed in this indescribable realm, a strange light was gradually emitted from his body. This light simply could not be described with any color. It was like the most beautiful color in the universe, and anyone who saw it would be shocked. This light was different from any ordinary light. Space seemed to no longer be able to restrain its existence. It directly enveloped the entire world of the crystal wall, and then enveloped the entire massive crystal wall system. It continued to spread, spreading to the entire supreme divine land, and even the entire universe. The core region of the supreme divine land was just too vast. Even though the speed at which the light was spreading was extremely fast, it was still a good thing from a macroscopic point of view. It was like a wriggling snail, slowly spreading. Based on this speed, it would probably take several years for it to spread to the entire core region. It would take even longer for it to spread to the entire supreme divine land. As for spreading to the entire universe, it would take even longer. Holiness's body was constantly improving, and his power was also constantly increasing. His soul was gradually transforming into a spirit. Countless tiny traces were constantly outlining his spirit, making it look like it was woven from countless tiny threads. During this process, traces of veined patterns gradually appeared on his body. Every single point of these veined patterns corresponded to the threads on his spirit, as well as to the nomological laws on the nomological law layer. Intense power fluctuations were constantly emitted from his body. As these changes occurred to Holiness's body, a faint layer of killing intent gradually started to accumulate outside the crystal wall system formed by the many crystal wall worlds. All sorts of terrifying and sinister forces that existed in the entire universe started to gradually gather in this star domain, gradually filling up the region filled with killing intent. This made the killing intent, which already possessed astonishing destructive power in the universe, become even more terrifying and explosive. Its destructive power also became even stronger. Holiness's form started to become younger and younger as he cultivated. As he stood there, a strong life force gradually seeped out of his body, making him look different from before. Suddenly, Holiness let out a soft grunt, and the power in his body surged. All the nomological laws and nomological laws that he had absorbed had completely fused with him. His life essence had instantly broken through a critical juncture. He had gone from being a mortal to a true itinerant immortal. He had become an itinerant immortal with astonishing power that could even destroy the entire universe. At that moment, the killing intent outside was completely filled with sinister forces. Countless lightning bolts, flames, golden knives, mountains, and many other strange and sinister things started to pour down and swarm towards the entire crystal wall system. The light emitted from Holiness's body suddenly froze and then instantly retracted. It was retracted into Holiness's body at a speed that was many times faster than before. This speed was so fast that when Holiness had just started retracting, the lightning, flames, and other attack had already been produced. However, by the time Holiness had completely retracted into Holiness's body, these attacks still hadn't reached the crystal wall system. To be continued, updated quickly. Chapter 1181. The moment all the light returned to his body, Holiness opened his eyes. In his eyes, there was something extraordinary and otherworldly about them. His eyes seemed to reflect all sorts of inconceivable scenes, as if all the mysteries of the universe had been compressed into his eyes. an aura that seemed to be in control of everything naturally emanated from his body. He raised his head. Although he was in a world within the gray space, his vision pierced through the layers of barriers and saw the terrifying tribulation clouds above them. He also saw the tribulation clouds swooping down with an attack that seemed capable of destroying the entire gray space. In the face of such a terrifying attack, Holiness's expression did not change. He casually grabbed at the void, and the layer of laws began to cave in as if it had been grabbed by a giant hand. Next, he casually shook his hand, and a large area of the layer of laws instantly underwent an invisible change. An unimaginable power broke through the limits of the layer of laws and descended upon the normal universe. Like an ocean wave, it rushed up into the void, filled with baleful aura filled with true power. This force was extremely powerful. The boundless attack that had already been launched towards the gray space collapsed under the force of this terrifying force. It gradually dissipated, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into tiny strands of energy that were swept up by the force of the force and rushed up towards the tribulation clouds above. In an instant, it rushed into the tribulation clouds. The tribulation clouds were formed from baleful aura and true power. They were not a single entity. Although the power was terrifying, its structure was mysterious, but it was not very sturdy. Under the force of this terrifying force, the tribulation clouds instantly split apart. From the original large piece, it became 5 or 6 pieces, then 5 or 6 pieces, then 50 or 60 pieces, 5 or 6,000 pieces, 5 or 600 million pieces, 5 or 6 trillion pieces. In the end, it all turned into fine dust that gradually dissipated and disappeared without a trace. The tribulation of ascending to the immortal realm in the center of the universe had been easily passed by him. From this, one could see how powerful Holiness himself was as the great sage of the transcendent divine land. How terrifying, how unimaginable. As Luo Fan watched Holiness easily pass the tribulation, he couldn't help but exclaim, "Out of all the cultivators I've enlightened, you have the easiest time passing the tribulation. Others, even the most technologically advanced products of superpower, can't do it as easily as you. I'll just live for a long time. Naturally, I'm just a little better at using power," Holiness said with a smile. At this moment, the aura of decay on his body had almost completely dissipated. Only a thin layer was left, and it was also the deepest layer. This thin layer of the aura of decay could not be eliminated. This was brought about by his stubbornness. The deeper his stubbornness was, the more stubborn this decaying aura was. Only when his obsession was eliminated, when he re-established a new goal, when he finally began a new life, and when he no longer longed for the life of tens of billions of years in the past, this deepest sense of decay could be completely eliminated. Now, have you felt that aura? Luo Fan chuckled and asked. He carefully sensed his surroundings. The invisible and intangible devil realm aura was hidden very deeply. If he was just an ordinary loose immortal or an ordinary cultivator, he would definitely not be able to sense such an obscure aura. But Holiness was no ordinary loose immortal. He was a terrifying loose immortal who had grasped the power to destroy the entire universe. He himself was a researcher who had calculated the truth of this universe for tens of billions of years. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for him to grasp that trace of the aura of the demon realm. This trace wasn't the true aura of the demonic realm, but for Holiness, it was enough for him to deduce what the aura of the demonic realm was like. The thought process of a technological civilization was to deduce the principles behind these phenomena from various phenomena. So for Holiness, who had grown up in a technological civilization for tens of billions of years, to deduce the true appearance of the aura through traces was not difficult. In fact, it was relatively simple. After making all sorts of deductions, Holiness could not help but sigh. So it's this aura. No wonder the universe has become so abnormal. Luo Fan was slightly taken aback when he heard this. Although he could sense the aura of the demonic realm, he only knew of its existence and its nature. He could not figure out why this aura would cause the universe to become so abnormal. He did not expect Holiness to be able to deduce the reason just by finding a trace of it. Holiness could not react to this, and at the same time, he was filled with endless curiosity. Oh, why is this aura causing the universe to become abnormal? Luo Fan asked. Holiness looked at Luo Fan and realized that he was really confused. Holiness did not refuse and explained, "This aura contains a kind of vitality. Well, perhaps it can't be described as vitality. It's more accurate to call it business. Because of the vastness of this aura, this kind of business has far-reaching effects. It gradually changes the laws of the universe and increases the probability of life being born in the universe. The probability of any star system giving birth to life, which used to be tiny, would increase to 100%, becoming an inevitability. Moreover, the intelligent life that is born will be chosen by this business. Only those that can grow into a human form will have the chance to evolve. Those that can't will naturally perish. Business." Luo Fan seemed to understand something when he heard this nondescript word. He sensed the aura of the demonic realm that filled the surroundings and carefully analyzed the various details of the aura. With the divine hint, he was able to find that business in an instant. This was a kind of consciousness of vitality, or rather, the will of vitality. This consciousness or will did not come from a single living being. Instead, it came from a universe, from heaven and earth, from all living things, and even from the state of chaos. It was a kind of strong desire for growth and expansion from the universe, heaven and earth, all living things, and chaos. Because the universe, heaven and earth, all living things, and chaos instinctively wanted to expand themselves, they naturally wanted to entrust all of their special characteristics to the aura and then infuse it with the laws and laws of other universes, thereby changing other universes and turning them into a state no different from themselves. Unfortunately, this is clearly a kind of distorted and transformed business. Luo Fan sighed. Although this kind of business was caused by the self-expansion desire of the universe, heaven and earth, all living things, and chaos, but here, because of some mysterious change, this caused the aura of the demonic realm to undergo some kind of subtle distortion. Under this distortion, this kind of business naturally produced a subtle change. This change caused the vast and boundless universe of technological civilization in front of him to have many living beings between the real demon realm and the vast and boundless universe of science and technology. He was afraid that there was nothing else in common between them. This kind of result, this made it impossible for Luo Fan to speculate about what was going on with the demonic realm through the situation of this universe. Which universe do I want to enter? I wonder if a mortal elder can help me think of a way, Holiness said. Which universe do you want to enter? Are you willing to give up everything in this universe? Right now, you already have the heart of longevity. The long years that follow won't be as torturous as the previous tens of billions of years. The feeling will definitely be different, Luo Fan said. I've lived in this universe for tens of billions of years. Everything in this universe is no longer a secret to me. Everything that happened in these universes seemed to me almost like nothing I had ever seen before. Everything, to me, was so familiar, so dull. How could I be reluctant to part with such a dull life? Holiness shook his head. As for the heart of longevity that immortal elder spoke of, I can already feel that my mentality has changed. But I believe that if I don't care about it and continue to stay here, it won't be long before this changed mentality returns to its original state of deathly stillness and decay. Holiness didn't wait for Luo Fan to speak and directly said this. This made Luo Fan dispel any thoughts of continuing to ask. This person before him was different from all the living beings he had enlightened before. His understanding of himself was even deeper and more objective than Luo Fan's understanding of himself. With this understanding, all of his decisions were the result of countless considerations. Since he said this, it meant that he had already made up his mind and could no longer change it. Faced with such a holiness, Luo Fan just smiled and said, "That's fine too. I also want to enter that world. If I open the door to that world in the future, I will definitely take you there with me. Thank you, immortal elder, for fulfilling my wish. Holiness bowed deeply to Luo Fan and said this for the first time since he had met Luo Fan. Before this, no matter what Luo Fan had done, even if he had imparted the cultivation method to him, or even if he had pointed out the source of his obsession, Holiness had taken it for granted and had no intention of thanking him. But now, Luo Fan had only given him a promise to bring him to the demon realm when the opportunity arose, and Holiness had thanked him. From this, it could be seen how much the sacred looked forward to entering another world. Luo Fan chuckled and stood up. In that case, I'll go take a look at the door. Do as you please. Immortal Elder, please wait. Let me lead the way for you, Holiness said hurriedly. As he spoke, he raised his hand and waved it gently. In an instant, a long and seemingly tangible rainbow appeared on the floating island. It extended from the front of the villa on the island to the bottom, rushing straight into the ground, connecting to the deepest and deepest place in the ground, where there was an indescribable place. This process lasted for a dozen breaths' time. After a dozen breaths' time, the long, seemingly tangible rainbow trembled slightly and then suddenly froze in place. Immortal Elder, please, Holiness said as he raised his hand to lead the way. Luo Fan nodded and smiled. With a light step, his figure and Holiness stepped onto the seemingly tangible rainbow. The moment the rainbow appeared, Luo Fan already knew the characteristics of the rainbow. He knew that it was a space-time passageway formed by reconstructing time and space. From the outside, the rainbow seemed very long, starting from the highest point in the sky and connecting to the bottom of the entire world in the crystal wall. The place was known as the Endless Abyss in the crystal wall. It seemed to span an unknown number of light years. However, within the rainbow, this distance was only a single step. As long as one stepped onto the rainbow, one would be able to see the end of the rainbow passageway and see everything that appeared there. Moreover, everything that one would see would be right in front of one's eyes. Although this concept was not earth-shattering or profound, it was rather interesting and had some merit. Although it was only a step for Luo Fan to go from the floating island to the bottom of the endless abyss in the crystal wall world, from a practical point of view, Holiness had created this rainbow passageway. It was simply superfluous. In fact, the god himself probably knew this as well. But in the end, Holiness still did it. Luo Fan did not disrespect him by going to the endless abyss. Instead, he took advantage of the situation and stepped onto the rainbow. Of course, this was not a performance by the two of them. Holiness did this. It was to express his gratitude to Luo Fan and to do his part when Luo Fan was working hard to open the door to another world and another universe. It would also make him feel more at ease. The reason why Luo Fan had gone along with his arrangements was because he knew what Holiness meant. He knew that this was what Holiness meant. So he purposely made Holiness feel at ease. Although this was not beneficial to Luo Fan, it was not harmful either. In any case, the cultivation method had already been imparted to Luo Fan. So why should he be stingy with this little favor? Stepping onto the rainbow path, Luo Fan raised his head and saw a huge vortex appear before him. This vortex was so huge that it was surrounded by a boundless, pitch-black void. It seemed that apart from this huge vortex, there was nothing else in the entire universe. Although I've seen it many times, I still feel extremely shocked every time I see it, Holiness said as he looked at the vortex with an indescribable expression. From the outside, Luo Fan felt that this whirlpool was somewhat familiar. It was vaguely similar to the huge vortex in the destroyed space-time that he had seen in the Divine Son's memories. At first glance, he almost thought that the two vortexes were the same. However, what appeared in the center of this vortex was not the demonic creatures that the vortex had thrown out. Instead, it was a tightly shut door. It was a huge door that was so huge that even stars were just like sand and stones to it. Such a huge door looked extremely simple and unadorned. It naturally gave off a kind of aura that could seal and isolate everything from the outside world. The entire door was engraved with countless lines that could not be described with words. These lines were profound and unfathomable. They seemed to be rules and laws, but also seemed to be the mysteries of the great Tao. It was as if the great Tao of the countless universes were outlining something that living beings could not understand. The combination of all these inexplicable circumstances gave people only one feeling, and that was shock. An uncontrollable shock that came from the bottom of his heart. Luo Fan lifted his foot and took a light step. This step, he did not use his magic, nor did he use his incredible strength. He simply took a light step like an ordinary person taking a stroll. However, this step allowed him to cross the entire rainbow path in an instant. In an instant, he traversed countless light years from the highest floating island in the crystal wall world. He arrived at the bottom of the bottomless abyss and arrived at the edge of the vortex. He faced the huge door in front of him, which was the size of sand and stones compared to stars. As Luo Fan took a step, Holiness also took a step forward. His figure was not slower than Luo Fan's at all. He arrived at the edge of the vortex and faced the huge door. The moment the two of them crossed the rainbow path gradually blurred and eventually disappeared without a trace. It was as if the process of supporting the two of them to cross the void had consumed all of its energy, and it could no longer maintain its physical form. As the rainbow disappeared, there was no longer any light in this bottomless abyss other than the huge vortex. There was no person or matter. Up, down, left, right, front, back, and forth, there was no physical existence. There was no end in sight. It was as if the vortex and the two of them had appeared alone in the boundless nothingness. That kind of feeling, if it was an ordinary person, would probably be scared to the point of going crazy. Luo Fan and Holiness were clearly not ordinary people. Of course, they would not go crazy. Holiness had come here countless times and was used to the state of this place. He had even formed some mysterious connection with the crystal wall world here, turning this place into the endless abyss of the crystal wall world. According to legend, this was the source of evil and the ruler of countless abyss demons. Chapter 1182. It's actually such a clear door. This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind as he looked at the door. The huge whirlpool was huge, but it did not produce any sound. Wisps of the aura of the demon world leaked out of the whirlpool, breaking through the layers of nothingness and the restrictions of the rules and laws. They directly surged into the universe outside and gradually caused the entire universe to change. The universe gradually lost its original appearance, and many characteristics that it didn't have before appeared. Luo Fan did not immediately open the huge door. Instead, he stayed at the edge and carefully observed the huge and boundless whirlpool to comprehend the various mysteries within. At first glance, the whirlpool looked very similar to the one Luo Fan had seen in the memories of the Divine Sun. However, that was only on the surface. The deeper mysteries between the two were actually worlds apart. If Luo Fan wanted to know how to open the door, he had to know what mysteries were hidden in the huge whirlpool in front of him and what incredible principles it contained. Only by knowing this could he understand the characteristics of the door, how it appeared, and then understand how to open the door and how to step through it safely. Luo Fan stood in the air at the edge of the whirlpool, his eyes reflecting the entire huge whirlpool. The vortex slowly rotated in his eyes. The trajectory of each point of rotation was so perfect that it constantly flowed through Luo Fan's mind. Bit by bit, the profound mysteries were gradually intercepted by him and gradually condensed into a ball. Then, he revealed his true appearance. A small whirlpool gradually took shape in his mind. As the small whirlpool took shape, Luo Fan felt that his mind seemed to be undergoing various subtle changes. Many of his thoughts were constantly being sucked in by the whirlpool, which then led to some subtle changes. It even vaguely gave him a feeling that he was going to become independent and become a real individual. These thoughts jumped actively in his mind and even grouped together. They vaguely formed a few groups and attacked each other. In the blink of an eye, a shocking battle was set off. Countless heroic deeds, enough to make people weep, took place. Such a change naturally couldn't escape Luo Fan's senses. The moment this thought appeared, he had already sensed it and couldn't help but reveal an amused smile on his face. There's actually such a transformation. I'm afraid I'll have a split personality if I'm not careful. This thought flashed through his mind. However, even after these thoughts flashed through his mind, they were still sucked in by the vortex that appeared in his mind. Then, following the circulation of the vortex, they were once again thrown away. Vaguely, they also carried that inexplicable business, and it felt like they were about to become independent. It was as if he had become a true individual, joining the activity of many thoughts, creating countless touching and moving deeds. In the face of such a change, Luo Fan did not hesitate and moved his thoughts. Another vortex appeared in his mind, side by side with the vortex that had just appeared. After this vortex appeared, it began to draw in the many thoughts that existed in his mind. It began to pull the many thoughts that existed in his mind into the vortex. As the vortex twisted them, they were continuously purified. In the end, the strands of business were removed, and these thoughts returned to their original, extremely pure state. They completely lost the independent change. However, as soon as these thoughts left the vortex that Luo Fan had purposely created, they were once again sucked in by the first vortex. They began to form businesses again and became independent. They were thrown out and began to join the organizations of those thoughts. They began to attack each other and get closer to each other. Then, at a certain moment, they were once again sucked in by the vortex above. They were purified into pure thoughts and rushed out from the center of the vortex. Like this, a strange cycle was formed. It vaguely displayed the mysteries of the reincarnation of living beings. Looking at the various changes in his mind, Luo Fan only smiled. He did not use any methods to stop these changes. Instead, he turned his attention to the huge vortex in front of him. He continued to guide the strands of power that belonged to the demon realm into the vortex, continuously channeling the mysteries within them into the vortex. This made the vortex grow stronger and stronger, and made the independent thoughts that passed through the vortex even more independent. These changes happened in Luo Fan's mind. From the outside, it seemed like Luo Fan was just staring blankly at the vortex in front of him. This was especially so from Divinity's point of view. Although Divinity had become a cultivator and possessed enough power to destroy the entire universe, he was still only an independent immortal. This level of cultivation made it impossible for him to understand just how profound the mysteries within the huge vortex were. To him, it was just a vortex. The reason why the vortex could emit such a dense and endless demonic aura was because of the characteristics of the power contained within the vortex. The way the vortex operated was still too complicated for him to understand. Luo Fan stood there for several months. For him, in the past few months, he had been immersed in the boundless mysteries of the great Tao of the earth and the universe every moment of every moment. However, for Divinity, who was watching him from the side, these few months had been too boring. He was surrounded by a boundless, pitch-black void. In front of him was a shocking, huge vortex, as well as a huge gate that would turn a star into sand and stone. It was just too monotonous. He had long since felt bored, and he could not help but want to leave. For Luo Fan, this was the center of the universe, the source of the demonic aura in the universe. But for the Crystal Wall world, this was the bottom of the endless abyss. Above it, there were tens of thousands of layers or even billions of layers of the abyss. Over the past tens of billions of years, all the living beings born and dead in the Crystal Wall world had been thrown into the billions of layers of the abyss. They had been contaminated by the demonic aura and combined with the negative emotions that had been born in the Crystal Wall world over the past tens of billions of years, forming endless demons. These countless layers of the abyss were actually between the layers of laws. Each layer of the abyss corresponded to a certain law. There were countless layers of the abyss, which corresponded to an infinite number of rules and laws. It was precisely because of the structure of the abyss that the endless abyss in the void could exist in the endless abyss that was unknown how many abyss layers there were. It was precisely because of this structure. Therefore, from divinity's point of view, there were countless layers of the abyss above him, each with trillions of demons. Deep in here, even though he was the creator of the crystal wall world, he could not help but feel an indescribable pressure. It must be known that there was no lack of powerful abyss lords and demon lords in the abyss. As the god of creation of the crystal wall world, he was the target of these countless abyss lords' blasphemy. If they could pull him into the abyss, he would definitely receive the boundless blessing of the abyss and increase his power to an unimaginable level. Even if they were not strong to divinity, he did not even need to move his mouth to exterminate all of the abyss lords. But as a normal person, even though he had lived for tens of billions of years, he still felt a little uncomfortable being targeted by so many evil intentions. He looked at Luo Fan, who seemed to be in a daze for how long. Finally, divinity could not take it anymore. He bowed to Luo Fan, turned around, and made a grabbing motion. A rainbow appeared above him from the floating island he had lived on for tens of billions of years. It directly rushed downwards and drilled into the ground. Under the shocked gazes of the many creatures, magicians, arcanists, martial sages, martial gods, and so on, it rushed underground, passed through countless layers of the abyss, and struck fear into the hearts of countless demons. It finally arrived in front of divinity and stabilized itself. After the rainbow stabilized, divinity did not hesitate to step onto it. In an instant, he was no longer in the endless void. Instead, the villa on the floating island appeared in front of him. With a single step, he instantly traversed countless light years and countless layers of the abyss to arrive in front of the villa. As he stepped onto the rainbow, it trembled slightly and faded away. It was like a rainbow after a rain, existing for an unimaginably short amount of time. Although Luo Fan was comprehending the mysteries of the vortex, he did not completely lose his perception of the outside world. Naturally, he had seen divinity leave very clearly. However, divinity merely smiled and did not pay it any mind. Back then, divinity had said that he would only guide him here, but he had not said that he would definitely accompany him. While divinity was comprehending the mysteries of the vortex, there was no need for him to watch from the side. After returning to the floating island, divinity heaved a sigh of relief. He looked down at the boundless world, and there was a strange ripple in his eyes. Previously, when he had made the decision to leave this world and this universe, he had been extremely resolute and unshakable like a boulder. However, now that the outcome had been decided, he felt an indescribable reluctance to leave. After all, this was a world that he had built up brick by brick, and he had stayed here for tens of billions of years. How could he not have any feelings for it? No matter how long an ordinary person had stayed in their hometown, no matter how dissatisfied they were with this place, they would not be able to endure staying there for even a second longer. However, if he really had to leave his hometown and never return to this place, he would definitely feel a strong reluctance in his heart. At this moment, divinity's mentality was that of an ordinary person who was about to leave his hometown forever. Let's take this time to look at this world again. Divinity sighed. After sighing, his body blurred, and he turned into an ordinary old man in magic armor. His appearance was much more ordinary, and he seemed to have aged a lot. Although he did not look as old as he did at the beginning, he looked like an ordinary old mage. He raised his hand and pressed down gently. A space-time door that even legendary mages could not easily use appeared in front of him. Divinity casually stepped into the light door, and his figure appeared on a continent. He began his last reminiscence before leaving this world. Over the tens of billions of years, divinity had sent many incarnations into this world to experience the lives of ordinary people. He had even left dozens of legends with different identities on each continent. This time, after hundreds of millions of years, or even billions of years, he had a very different feeling. As he breathed in the air that used to be irritating, he suddenly felt a faint sense of familiarity and warmth welling up in his heart. He could not help but sigh again When divinity was reminiscing for the last time, Luo Fan had already gained something. After several months of understanding this vortex, the vortex that appeared in his mind had become more and more complete. Now, it was even more complete than the vortex that he had comprehended from the memories of the Son of God. Its power was clearly hundreds of times stronger. At this moment, in his mind, the independent thoughts that filled his mind had already occupied almost all of it. The vortex of purifying thoughts seemed to be unable to bear the burden. Although it was constantly purifying those thoughts and turning them into pure and refined thoughts, it seemed to be unable to bear the burden. There was no way to stop the increasing number of independent thoughts that appeared in his mind. The reason for this was very simple. Back then, when Luo Fan had obtained this purifying vortex, it was only through the memories of the Son of God. Although the Son of God cultivation was extremely profound and had reached the peak below the saint level, he did not care about that vortex. He did not spend much effort to understand the mysteries of that vortex. It was left in his memories. Compared to the real vortex, that vortex was naturally much simpler, and there were many flaws in it. In contrast, what Luo Fan comprehended, the vortex that added business to thoughts, was right in front of him. It was an extremely complete vortex that had not changed hands or been reduced in any way. Such a whirlpool was naturally more convenient for Luo Fan to comprehend compared to the previous whirlpool. Naturally, he would also obtain more. With such a difference, it was only natural that the additional business whirlpool that appeared in his mind was stronger and more complete than the purification whirlpool. If it was the other way around, it would be strange. At a certain moment, the independent thoughts that existed in Luo Fan's mind suddenly gathered together. All of the independent thoughts contributed their own power and began to reconstruct their power to suppress the purifying vortex. They wanted to completely seal the purifying vortex. The purifying vortex was necessary for Luo Fan to purify his thoughts. It was a good thing that could make his thoughts more refined and more resilient. However, to these independent thoughts, the purifying vortex was a fatal existence that would make them lose their lives and turn them into ignorant and unconscious beings. In the beginning, these thoughts were not independent enough and did not know how to resist, so they allowed the purifying vortex to convert them. But now, after a few months in the outside world, after countless years of growth, these thoughts have become many times more independent. As they fought and communicated with each other, they even developed an extremely refined cultivation civilization and began to create many methods to deal with the purification of the purifying vortex. The number of independent thoughts kept increasing. This was partly because the additional business vortex was growing larger and more complete. It was also because these independent thoughts had begun to develop the methods to resist the purification of the purifying vortex. This method of resisting and purifying continued to develop, and in the end, it would naturally develop to this stage. All the vortices began to take the initiative to completely seal the purifying vortex. It was just like how humans treated death. At first, they would only think of ways to delay the arrival of death, but at a certain stage, they would naturally use all means to eliminate death. These thoughts were, after all, Luo Fan's thoughts. They all contained the comprehension that Luo Fan had in an instant. When combined, the power was enough to shake the heavens and the earth. All of their power gathered to seal the purifying vortex, but the result was quite obvious. Under the seal, the speed at which the purifying vortex rotated became slower and slower. In the end, it became so slow that it seemed to have completely stopped. The purifying function of the thoughts completely stopped. So it's like this. Luo Fan sensed the various changes in his mind. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. Such an incredible change had actually occurred in his mind. This was something he could never have imagined. After sealing the cleansing whirlpool, those independent thoughts were ecstatic. Every independent thought was cheering, excited that a world without death had finally arrived. Each of them was crazily enjoying the pleasure of eternal life. Chapter 1183. A door that was extremely huge compared to the vortex appeared in the center of the vortex. The door was covered in strands of complicated veined patterns that interweaved to form an extremely complicated and mysterious pattern. It was vaguely similar to the huge door in the center of the real vortex in front of Luo Fan at this moment. The patterns on the door were still approaching the real door at a speed visible to the naked eye. As Luo Fan's understanding of the mystery of the real vortex deepened, Luo Fan looked at the door that appeared out of thin air and was slightly surprised. Where did this door lead to? He did not deliberately condense this door, but it naturally formed along with the completion of the vortex. Normally, such a door could only be an illusion, but in fact, Luo Fan could vaguely feel that this door was complete and could discover that this door was connected to a certain place. However, at this moment, because this door had only just formed, that kind of connection was faintly discernible, intermittent, and continuous. Moreover, the connected location was also constantly changing, as if it was still probing and searching. Therefore, Luo Fan did not know where this door led to. Out of curiosity, Luo Fan carefully sensed it. He discovered that the place that this door that appeared in the vortex was not connected to another space, nor was it outside of his body, but inside his body. This was the place that this door was connected to, and it was actually probing inside his body. It seemed to be searching for a certain hidden space-time inside his body that was extremely deep. Of course, this search process could not continue forever. Soon, when Luo Fan replenished the vortex to a certain degree, the search finally ended. It's actually connected to this place. Luo Fan sensed the place that this door was connected to and could not help but be amazed. This was because the place that this door was connected to was none other than his sea of consciousness world. It was a boundless place that had become an incomparably mysterious world after going through countless refinements and upgrades. The moment this space-time door was finally connected to this sea of consciousness world, at the edge of the sea of consciousness world, a similar door appeared, but it was unknown how many times smaller. This door was faintly discernible at this moment, as if it did not exist, as if it was an illusion, as if it was real, as if it had existed here since ancient times, as if it could disappear at any time. The entire door was tightly shut, and the patterns on it were fine and dense, but they were not the same as the patterns on the door that existed in the sea of consciousness. Instead, they seemed to complement each other. It seemed that every door on the door in the sea of consciousness could be found and combined together to form an extremely complete pattern. Under what mechanism would such a change occur? Luo Fan thought to himself, and his expression became no longer calm. He opened his eyes and quietly looked at the vast whirlpool in front of him, as well as the huge door that seemed to have existed since ancient times above the whirlpool. His eyes seemed to penetrate countless space-times, and he saw another door that corresponded to this door. When the two of them combined, they would form a mysterious and unfathomable complete body. The connection between Luo Fan's sea of consciousness world and the mind was an extended relationship. The mind was an existence that any intelligent creature possessed, but the sea of consciousness world could only be possessed by a cultivator who had cultivated to an extremely profound realm. It seemed that the sea of consciousness world was an extension of the mind, but the truth was just the opposite. The mind was an extension of the sea of consciousness world. It was only with the sea of consciousness world that a creature could become a living creature, and only then would it have a chance to become a truly intelligent creature. Without the sea of consciousness world, the mind would not have a basis and could not be born. This creature would no longer be a living creature, but could only be called a wisp of intelligence. As for why all living creatures had a mind, but only powerful cultivators could have a sea of consciousness world, this reason was extremely simple. This was because the sea of consciousness world actually existed for weak living creatures. However, the form of its existence was not in the form of a world, but in the form of the sea of consciousness. The sea of consciousness was actually the residence of the spirit. It appeared because of the spirit, and its foundation was a part of the spirit of the soul. As long as there was a spirit of the soul, the sea of consciousness would definitely exist, but the size and strength would be different. For powerful living creatures, the sea of consciousness might be extremely vast the moment they were born, forming an ocean or even a scene of a world. As for weak living creatures, when they were born, the sea of consciousness might not even be able to clearly sense their surroundings. Of course, the sea of consciousness was not developed, and was so small that it could only accommodate the existence of the spirit of the soul. As for the mind, compared to the sea of consciousness world, it was one level lower. Any living creature, as long as it knew how to think, would have a mind. The only difference was whether the mind was broad or narrow, and whether the mind's endurance was strong or weak. Therefore, it could be said that the sea of consciousness world was the origin of the mind. This door that appeared in the mind directly connected to the sea of consciousness world, directly establishing a door in the sea of consciousness world. This was directly establishing a door in the origin of the world. According to this logic, this real door that appeared here must be connected to the origin of the universe on the other side of the door. Where could such a universe be born in the demon realm? This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. As soon as this thought appeared, it was naturally pulled by the vortex, and it began to quickly revolve in the vortex. However, this time, this thought was not thrown out of the vortex by the dense business. Instead, it directly rushed towards the huge door in the vortex. In an instant, this thought, which had become an independent existence due to the dense business, directly collided with the huge door. Clang! The sound of a huge bell being rung suddenly came from above the huge door. This sound was earth-shattering. It caused Luo Fan's entire mind to tremble violently, causing the endless independent thoughts that seemed to be living and cultivating in an ordinary country to be attracted by this sound, and they focused their attention on the huge door. Even the purifying vortex that Luo Fan had set up seemed to gradually change under the loud sound of the bell. It gradually distorted, and vaguely, it showed signs of gradually becoming complete. The endless lines and patterns on its surface actually showed signs of extending outwards. The independent thought that collided with the door did not directly knock the huge door open. Instead, it crashed into the door and shattered into pieces. The entire thought completely turned into fine powder. It flew in all directions. It directly entered Luo Fan's mind and disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Facing this situation, Luo Fan's expression changed slightly. As long as I have the thought of investigating it, it will be directly pushed into this door. Doesn't that mean that as long as I am in this real whirlpool, as long as the thought of passing through the door popped up in his mind, I will naturally be sent to the devil realm? Such a thought appeared in his mind once again, and this thought once again fell into the fate of the previous thought and was directly spun by the whirlpool, directly colliding with a huge door in the middle of the whirlpool. Once again, an incomparably loud sound of a bell shook his mind. This caused all of the independent thoughts to finally truly notice the huge door that had appeared out of nowhere in the whirlpool, and also caused the purification whirlpool to truly tremble, producing real changes that could be seen with the naked eye and truly beginning to transform. This thought caused even more movement than the previous thought. The fundamental reason for this was that the thought that Luo Fan had produced was stronger and more certain, and it was no longer a doubtful thought like before. That was to say, this whirlpool did not send the thought to collide with the huge door to destroy it, but to directly send the thought to break through the door and directly into the world that the door was connected to. The reason why it did not succeed, and why the two thoughts directly died, was that the two thoughts were not strong enough, so they did not succeed. If these two thoughts were strong enough at this moment, the huge door would have been blasted open, and the huge sea of consciousness world behind the door would have been revealed. It's so simple. Let me see. Thinking of this, Luo Fan directly condensed a pure and flawless thought in his mind, which contained the deepest and most firm thought to break through the door and go to the world behind the door. For him, who had already reached the exceptional Tao Master, such a thing could not be simpler. Even if it was an ordinary person, if they had a firm will, their thoughts could reach an indestructible realm, let alone an existence like Luo Fan. Of course, it was extremely simple to produce such a pure, flawless, deep, and firm thought. As soon as this thought appeared, it emitted an unbreakable light that illuminated the entire mind, causing all the independent thoughts to instantly feel ashamed of their inferiority and a feeling of worship. It was like the legendary king of thoughts, the manifestation of the god of thoughts. Because of the appearance of this thought, the level of the entire sea of consciousness seemed to have suddenly risen to a whole new level. Its existence here seemed to be able to suppress the entire mind, allowing it to exist eternally and be indestructible. In fact, if Luo Fan was just an ordinary person, as long as he could have such a thought, then he would really be able to make his mind exist forever. Although it wouldn't be truly indestructible, it would allow him to no longer be affected by the passage of time. From then on, he would be able to live forever like a true immortal. It could be said that the entire process of Luo Fan condensing this pure, flawless, profound, and firm thought, if it was extremely meticulously broken down, transformed, and described in words, it would be a supreme technique that would lead straight to immortality. It wouldn't even need to be shackled by any external environment, and it could even be cultivated in the age of chaos. If an ordinary person could really do it according to the method recorded in such a text, he could finally achieve this step. Then he would have eternal life. Even if his body did not have a trace of strength, he could no longer be shackled by the reincarnation of life and death. Of course, this was obviously an extremely difficult thing to do. It should be known that thoughts could be born and extinguished at any time. Billions of existences could be produced in an instant. Such existences had to be polished and tempered until they were pure and flawless. They had to be strengthened to the extreme and be extremely firm. They could even suppress the mind and will. To let the mind and will escape the influence of time was so difficult that it almost made people despair. Compared to ordinary cultivation methods, this could continuously prolong one's lifespan while obtaining power. In the process of finally reaching the realm of immortality, it was more than 1,000 times, 10,000 times more difficult. If Luo Fan really spread this method, then it was possible that out of 1 million intelligent beings who cultivated this method, only one would be able to learn it. And out of 1 billion living beings who had learned it, only one would be able to cultivate this method to the end and obtain the will to suppress the mind and will. From there, they would be able to obtain eternal life. Ordinary cultivation techniques, no matter how bad they were, would not have such a minuscule success rate. For ordinary cultivation methods, out of 10 intelligent beings who cultivated it, perhaps one might be able to learn it. And out of 100,000 living beings who had learned it, perhaps one might be able to cultivate to immortality and become an itinerant immortal. The difference in difficulty between the two could be imagined. However, compared to ordinary cultivation methods, cultivating this method of suppressing one's mind and will had an advantage, and that was that it did not require any external sources of energy or vitality. As long as one had intelligence, as long as one had enough willpower, as long as one could persist for a long time, one could obtain eternal life. Luo Fan did not care about this method of tempering one's mind that could become a profound cultivation system. He did not even think about spreading it out and truly developing it into an alternative cultivation method of immortality. At this moment, he only sent this thought into the vortex. As the vortex dazzled, it continuously spun. Gradually, the vortex became denser and denser, gradually producing all sorts of subtle changes. This thought was simply too firm, too stable, and too pure. To change it, the amount needed was extremely shocking. At the very least, compared to the many thoughts that Luo Fan had before, including the thought of being sent into the vortex, to collide with the door, it was several tens of millions of times more. Under these circumstances, the time that this thought circulated in the vortex was not as short as the countless thoughts from before. Instead, it was extremely long. It spun in the vortex again and again, continuously absorbing the little bits of business that were born from the vortex. Gradually, it became an independent thought. The vortex spun at an unimaginable speed. Even though this was many times longer than the other thoughts, when the thought finally absorbed enough business and completely became an independent thought, only half a day had passed. After half a day, when the thought finally became completely independent, it had already become bright and dazzling. It gave off a boundless, mysterious light and was pushed by the vortex directly towards the door that was unimaginably huge. There was a loud rumble. At this moment, Luo Fan felt like his mind and will had completely collapsed from his collision. He even vaguely felt countless cracks appearing in his mind and will. As for the purification vortex, it completely collapsed in an instant. Then, in the next moment, the vortex condensed again and instantly condensed into a vortex that looked similar to before, but was already fundamentally different. An indescribably complete aura appeared directly above the vortex. The rotation strength of the entire vortex and the suction force increased greatly. The seal formed by the power of the endless thoughts was instantly broken by the power of the vortex. All the thoughts were like flowing water that was frantically sucked into the vortex. They were then cleansed by the vortex and became pure and refined. Then they were spat out from the center of the vortex, forming a long stream of thought light that continuously dispersed in his mind and will. Then they were attracted by the huge vortex with the door and were continuously thrown into the vortex. After being affected by the business, they once again turned into independent thoughts and left the vortex. In this way, the two once again formed a complete balance, forming a strange reincarnation. At this moment, the feeling that Luo Fan's mind and will had completely collapsed disappeared. What replaced it was an inexplicable sense of clarity. It was an inexplicable sense of relaxation. It was as if a window had suddenly been opened in a place that was originally sealed, allowing fresh air to continuously pour in from the outside. It's finally opened. Luo Fan smiled and thought to himself. As soon as this thought appeared, it was thrown into the strange reincarnation. However, for Luo Fan, it was enough. It did not affect his thinking ability at all. At this moment, a small gap had already opened up in the huge portal that had appeared in the vortex. This gap was so small compared to the entire door that it was almost insignificant and difficult to detect. However, it was already large enough for any thought. It felt as if a huge spaceship could fly into it. The incomparably firm, profound, and pure thought that Luo Fan had specially condensed had already drilled into the portal. Chapter 1184. After absorbing so much business, this thought had already obtained true independence. It passed through the door and instantly appeared in the world of Luo Fan's sea of consciousness. The way it appeared was from the crack in the small door that appeared out of thin air at the edge of the sea of consciousness. When it first appeared, it was only the size of a speck of dust. It even felt as if an ant's breath could make it fly up to the nine heavens' imperial court. However, it grew as fast as the wind. In just an instant, it had already grown to the size of the door. Compared to the size at the beginning, its size had increased by more than 1 trillion times. This kind of change was very mysterious. There was no other force in the whole process. It was as if it was caused by the natural change of space. It was because of the change of time and space that caused the originally small thing to suddenly grow to the size of the door. However, even so, it was only the size of a normal person. This independent thought was the firmest, purest, and most profound thought that Luo Fan had to break through obstacles. Its original form was that of a sharp thorn. However, at this time, because this thought had obtained a powerful business, it had formed its own body, and its form had naturally changed. It was no longer its original appearance, but had turned into a form similar to Luo Fan's, which was a human form. To everything in Luo Fan's body, He was the supreme great way. Everything in his body must conform to his requirements. It must conform to his supreme great way. Only then could it have a future, and only then could it obtain real growth. And the moment this independent thought became independent, it had actually become a cultivator living under Luo Fan's great way. Naturally, it had to conform to the rules of this great way. Therefore, at this moment, the form that this thought transformed into was none other than a human form. When this independent thought appeared in this boundless world of the sea of consciousness, it suddenly appeared. It was still filled with a firm, deep, and pure aura of breaking through obstacles. It looked around and found that the world in front of it was so complete, so vast, and so mysterious. It let out a long shout. Its body emitted endless light. This light could not be described with words. It directly filled up the entire sea of consciousness, causing the entire sea of consciousness to feel completely different. Based on this thought, it was obvious that he wanted to break open this sea of consciousness world as well, leaving the sea of consciousness. This was one of the disadvantages of having pure, firm, and deep thoughts. Because this thought could not be eliminated, no matter where it went, it would pursue the meaning engraved in this thought. For example, the meaning that Luo Fan had engraved on this thought at this moment was to break through everything, to transcend the limitations of one's original self. Therefore, this thought was deeply engraved in its instincts. It was the same for the huge portal in the center of the whirlpool. After passing through the portal and entering the sea of consciousness, it was also the same. Even if this place was already boundless to the sea of consciousness world, complete and unimaginably wonderful, it still had such a thought. If this thought was lucky enough to transcend and leave this sea of consciousness world and arrive at the real whirlpool where Luo Fan was, it would definitely start to think of ways to break through that layer of nothingness without hesitation. When it stepped into the real universe, it would want to break through again. Like this, it would break through layer after layer without any end. Even if it was in a state of chaos, it would not be able to wear down its desire to break through. Unless it was completely destroyed and the profound thought in it was completely eliminated, then such a process could be stopped. This was actually the kind of weakness that could suppress one's mind with an incomparably firm will, and thus obtain an immortal lifespan. It was one of the weaknesses that was not a weakness. That was because this thought was so firm, pure, and profound that it could even transcend the samsara of life and death. Therefore, for living beings, once such a thought was formed, their thoughts would naturally be affected by this thought. Naturally, the thought engraved in this thought would become their own code of conduct. For example, if a person refined his honest thought to this level, then honesty would become his unshakable code of conduct. Even if his honesty might bring him a disaster, even if his honesty might destroy the world and the universe, he would not change it at all. However, generally speaking, the refined thoughts of ordinary people would not be as extreme as the one being refined by Luo Fan at this time. Normally, they would refine the obsession in their hearts, such as protecting their loved ones, obtaining freedom, obtaining revenge, and so on and so forth. Of course, the results of such thoughts would not be as serious as the one being refined by Luo Fan at this time. Luo Fan's sea of consciousness world was so stable that even a sage-to-be could not be shaken by a fight inside. Although this thought was pure, profound, and firm, it was only a thought after all. Even if it was refined to this level and mastered a terrifying power, it was only equivalent to the individual immortal realm. Of course, it was impossible for such a power to break the shackles of the sea of consciousness world and escape from the sea of consciousness world. This thought rushed up to the sky and crazily rushed towards the boundless void above. The light around it became more and more intense. Although its essence was becoming firmer, purer, and more profound, its size was becoming smaller and smaller. Obviously, the strange light radiating from this humanoid thought and enveloping the entire sea of consciousness world was produced by this humanoid thought burning itself. The more intense the light was, the more damage this humanoid thought would suffer. The more dazzling the light was, the closer this humanoid thought was to death. The world of Luo Fan's sea of consciousness was too high, too high. Even when this humanoid thought completely burned itself out and completely transformed into the mysterious light that shrouded the sea of consciousness, the end of the sky was still in an infinitely distant place. It still could not get close to it. It could not touch the barrier of the sea of consciousness world, let alone break through it. Luo Fan saw everything that was happening in the sea of consciousness world and could not help but sigh. Although it was just a thought, the heroism and desperation that it revealed made him feel a little emotional. He seemed to vaguely see his own shadow in that thought. Although he and this thought appeared different in appearance, they were essentially the same. This thought pursued breaking through everything, no matter what was blocking it, even if it was a real world. Even if it was a real world. And what Luo Fan pursued, it was the primordial chaos Tao fruit that seemed extremely remote and seemed to be infinitely far away. No matter how hard he tried, he could only get close to it and could not truly obtain it. The Sage Realm. This thought was in any world. It wanted to break through the limits of the world. It wanted to break through the world. Although Luo Fan did not have the same thoughts as it, his performance was almost exactly the same. Whether it was in the primordial world or the Earth universe, whether it was in the Tianyuan world or the universe in front of him. What was the difference between what he did and what that thought did? Wasn't it also using all means to break through the limits of the world and the limits of the world? In the primordial world, he broke through the limits and entered the Tianyuan world and the Earth universe. In the Earth universe, he broke through the limits and entered the path of transcendence. He came to the Earth universe before the world was shattered. Here, he was going to break through the limits again. Now, he was thinking about going to the demon world. After thinking for a while, Luo Fan let out a long sigh. With a slight thought, the two vortexes in his mind collapsed at the same time. The thoughts that had been changed by the vortex, which had either become independent or had been cleansed to become extremely pure, were all completely fixed in an instant. Then, in Luo Fan's will, all the thoughts were suppressed again. All the abnormal changes returned to their original state. It looked no different from how it was at the beginning. After the collapse of the two vortexes, they turned into two faintly discernible clouds of smoke. There were countless tiny lines swimming in the two clouds of smoke. They looked very chaotic, but vaguely, there seemed to be some kind of incredible mystery in them. It was as if the circulation of every line could reflect some kind of supreme law and contain some amazing mystery. With a thought from Luo Fan, the two clouds of smoke that contained countless lines began to slowly merge. During this process, all kinds of incredible changes occurred. The countless tiny lines intertwined, collided, and connected with each other. After dozens of breaths, the two clouds of smoke turned into one and gradually stabilized. A mysterious rune appeared in the smoke and gradually absorbed everything in the smoke. In the end, all of the smoke was absorbed into the rune, leaving only this strange rune floating in his mind. This rune was so complicated that it was beyond the imagination of living beings. The lines seemed to be calculated in units, and the style of the runes was completely different from the style of Earth's universe. It looked like an unfamiliar cultivation system, and it emitted various strange powers, causing any living creature that looked at the runes to be affected by them. The runes first stuffed an endless amount of information into one's mind, and then with a turn, the endless information was instantly cleansed, causing an extremely subtle change in one's mind. If an ordinary person saw this rune, their mind would instantly collapse due to the endless information that the rune stuffed into them, and they would become crazy. Next, they would be cleansed by the strange power of the rune. Their mind would become blank, and they would become an idiot. Luo Fan was naturally not an ordinary person, and he was not even an ordinary cultivator. This rune had condensed in his mind. To him, the appearance of this rune was like a wave washing over his mind. The endless information was equivalent to the liquid that was used to wash something. During this washing, Luo Fan felt that his mind had become purer and purer. With a wave of his hand, the rune appeared on Luo Fan's hand. After the rune appeared in the outside world, its performance was completely different from when it appeared in his mind. The invisible, strange power instantly began to pull in everything around it. After it was absorbed and converted, it turned into endless, strange lights. It started to spread out in all directions. The void layer below the law layer was simply nothingness. Even time and space did not exist. If it were not for the mysterious vortex and the door, there would not have been any space for living beings to stay. In such a void layer, the rune could only attract one type of matter from the outside world. That was the aura of the demon realm that was released by the vortex. It was the aura of the demon realm that contained endless business and even changed the entire universe. It was the aura of the demon realm that made the entire universe completely different from ordinary universes. This aura was invisible and intangible. If one's cultivation realm was not high enough, one would not even be able to sense it. However, this aura was like a real substance to the rune. It was like a real gas. It allowed the rune to continuously pull and absorb it. It kept changing. In the end, it turned into endless rays of light that began to spread throughout the entire vortex. This rune was organized by Luo Fan. It was the combination of the fundamental mysteries of the vortex and the purifying vortex. Due to the mysterious and unfathomable relationship between the two vortexes, the whole entity formed was extremely mysterious and complete. After the two completely formed, one could not tell that they were the product of the combination of the mysteries of the two vortexes. Even the mysteries contained in the two vortexes did not interfere with each other. Instead, they complemented and cooperated with each other, forming a mystery that was born from the two vortexes but transcended the two vortexes. These vortexes might have originally belonged to a whole. This thought appeared in Luo Fan's mind. The two vortexes could affect each other. Understanding the mysteries of the vortex in front of him could make the originally incomplete, purifying vortex complete. Moreover, the two mysteries could merge together to form this seemingly uncombined whole. It was very likely that the two vortexes were originally a whole. However, for some reason, they were separated. If these two vortexes were originally a whole, then wouldn't they be complete once they are combined? Luo Fan suddenly thought of this, and his expression couldn't help but become serious. Although the whole formed by the two vortexes had no signs of being combined, it looked so complete and perfect without a trace of inconsistency. However, no matter how self-righteous Luo Fan was, he would not think that the combination of these two vortexes would be the complete state of the original whole. His luck could not be that heaven-defying. Therefore, the most likely situation was that, back then, an unknown number of years ago, a certain entity suddenly split apart, splitting into several individuals that were far more than two. After experiencing the evolution of time, two of these individuals turned into vortexes. One was discovered by the divine son of the original body, and then obtained indirectly by Luo Fan. The other appeared in this universe and changed this universe. At this moment, Luo Fan personally witnessed and experienced it. In fact, it was very likely that the several individuals that were separated had all turned into vortexes. They appeared in different spacetimes and carried out various completely different changes to those spacetimes, giving those spacetimes all sorts of characteristics that Earth did not have. The more Luo Fan thought about it, the more likely he felt that this was the case. If that's the case, perhaps this rune shouldn't be combined like this. As Luo Fan thought about this, he raised his hand and began to adjust the rune that appeared on his hand. The rune itself was so complicated that even an ordinary person would break down and become an idiot at a glance. However, it was naturally nothing to Luo Fan. After all, this rune was condensed by Luo Fan himself. The reason why this rune was a rune was because it was formed by his changes and adjustments. Under such circumstances, He might not be able to fully comprehend the mysteries of the runes so quickly, but he would definitely have a deep understanding of it, and it would definitely not be a problem for him to adjust it. If these two whirlpools are only a small part of a huge whole, then they shouldn't be connected here, and they shouldn't be connected here either. They should be connected here instead. Luo Fan adjusted this rune. The number of lines in the entire rune was calculated in millions, so it would naturally be an extremely shocking task to adjust in detail. Even with Luo Fan's means, it was not something that could be done in a short period of time if he wanted to completely adjust it. Back then, it had only taken him a few dozen breaths to condense the rune before him. However, when Luo Fan finally finished adjusting the rune, more than a month had passed. After more than a month, Luo Fan floated around the whirlpool, holding an extremely complicated and mysterious rune in his hand. However, it was broken and seemed to be missing 99% of the rune. This rune did not have any unusual phenomenon at the moment. It just lay quietly on Luo Fan's hand without emitting any light or aura. It was just like the most ordinary rune. It did not have the mysterious charm of constantly absorbing the aura of the demon realm and releasing endless light like before.